IB Nation. Welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Y'all see it down below. It's Friday. So that means it's time for the Friday free-for-all mailbag. Trevor Trowbridge is with me today. Big Trev, I'm ready to go, man. There's going to be some fun questions. We got some really good stuff in here already. I am very, very excited about this. We're going to dive into some of this. If y'all want to talk Notre Dame football, obviously we're talking about that. If you want to have some recruiting questions, you can talk about that. If you want to talk about the big weekend of college football coming up, we could talk about that too. So this does not have to be just a Notre Dame only show. We can talk anything college football related that you all want to discuss here on this Friday free-for-all. We're going to go for a good, strong 3 hours here, Trevor, and knock out as many of these awesome questions as we can, man. And I just saw a great one come in. What upsets do you want to happen? Can't wait to get to that one. That's going to be a great question. We are not Irish English. You are not going to get that brought into the show today, homie. We are not doing it. Not doing it. So we're going to – don't even try it, man. Don't even try it today. But, Trev, man, how you doing today? I'm ready to rock and roll, buddy. You ready to get this thing going?
Brian, you know me, man. I'm always ready to go. Love talking football. I love Friday. We've talked about it all week. We can kick back and relax this weekend, man. It's not going to be as stressful. Look at us.
I know. We know Notre Dame's not going to lose this weekend. That's a great thing. I don't have to be stressed about that. I don't have to deal with unhappy people because Notre Dame lost. You know, it's going to be a blast, man. I'm looking forward to it. Very, very much looking forward to it. It's going to be a fun show. Lots to discuss. Going to sit back and relax this weekend, like you said. Sit there at noon. I mean, just to talk about like what my game watches this weekend. You know what I mean, Trev? Obviously at noon, I'm going to have multiple TVs going. I've got my big TV upstairs, not big TV. I mean, like main TV. You know what I mean? Like as opposed to my monitor, which I spend millions of hours looking at every week because I'm doing work. But at noon, I'm going to obviously have that big game on Fox between Ohio State and Penn State. That's going to be a big one. On one of my sides, I'm going to have a little Ole Miss Arkansas on one side. I'm going to have Duke Miami on the other side until that becomes a blowout. Then I'm going to switch it probably over to Air Force and Army. Going to have those games on. I might even check out a little bit of that Virginia Tech Air Force game, Trev, at noon. That's going to be an interesting one. 12:45, Vandy and Auburn comes on. 3:30, I'm going to be watching Oregon and Michigan a little bit. I'm going to be watching a lot of great 3:30 games I'll be looking at. Florida, Georgia I'll have on. Texas Tech, Iowa State I'll have on. Indiana, Michigan State I'll have on. North Carolina, Florida State I'll have on. I'm really hoping that the Seminoles can finally get this thing going and actually earn a decent win so Notre Dame can you can have at least a reason to convince your players that that's the team you need to be up for. I think there's something that, and then of course 7:30, 8 o'clock, some awesome games on tonight. Texas A&M, South Carolina, I'll probably have on my main TV, flipping between that and Louisville, Clemson. Might have both of them up. Who knows? And then I'll be checking out the Wisconsin, Iowa game a little bit. And that USC Washington game, Trevor, is one I'm really intrigued by. Really, really intrigued by. And then of course at 8 o'clock, Pitt and SMU I'll have on there as well, man. So many great games this weekend. So many great games on this weekend.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Can't wait to sit back, kick back on the couch, watch some awesome football. But before we get kicked off into the Friday mailbag, one of my favorite segments that we do here at Irish Breakdown, I'm going to talk to you guys real quick about a new partnership that Irish Breakdown has. Speaking of partnerships, it's an awesome weekend of football. Brian, like you just talked about, Ole Miss plays Arkansas. Ohio State plays Penn State. Texas A&M is going, and they're lighting it up, right? So many good games to watch. Not a better partner to watch that with, though, than with MyBookie, right, guys? You've heard us talk about it all week. Make sure to check out MyBookie, okay? If you're anything like me, you like to throw down some bets on a weekend, especially when there's a lot of awesome football on, it's definitely the sports book that you guys want to check out. What you guys need to do is if you go on, okay, and you use promo code IRISH, IRISH. What that's going to do for you all is it's going to double your deposit bonus, which is awesome. So it means if you put in $25 to your account, you use promo code IRISH, you're going to get an additional $25 in bonus bets. It's awesome. I just did it. It's fantastic. Can't wait to essentially use free money to bet on for this weekend. Hopefully come out of this weekend a little bit happier than just kicking back and relaxing, watching some games, right? I checked out the MyBookie risk-free Thursdays last night for the Thursday night football game. Unfortunately, didn't really work out in my favor, but bright side, it's risk-free, right? So it's all a good reasons to go and check out MyBookie. You can enroll in their loyalty rewards program. You earn extra cash just for playing. So be sure to check them out. It's a sports book that gives you control and rewards you for every time you play.
So who'd you take?
I bet on the Texans because I did Texans money line because I was like, you know what, the Jets are just reeling right now.
They're terrible, yeah.
And then before I placed the bet, I forgot to do my research and then I remembered that Stephon Diggs tore his ACL and Nico Collins still out and didn't work out.
But I think they help with that stuff, right? Like that, they help you with that process a little bit, right?
They do
with that research, so that'll work. That'll work. And tons of games this weekend that people can consider that for that, Trevor. But hey, without further ado, folks, let's get rocking and rolling on the Friday mailbag. We actually have some super chats. You guys know how to do this, right? So put the question in, put an MB or put a mailbag emoji so that we can easier tell if we may still be able to see that you have a question there, but we kind of look for that. It makes it easier for us to identify what's a question and what's just normal chat or conversation in the chat. If you want to get something pushed to the top, throw a super chat in there. And we actually have 3 so far to kick the show off, Trevor. So let's get rocking and rolling with our guy, Tyler Evans, with question numero uno.
Tyler Evans with the super chat. Thank you so much, Tyler. What do you think of starting the 2025 season against Miami on the road? And what do you think of the 2025 schedule so far?
Well, I don't have a huge problem with playing Miami on the road to start the season off per se. It's more so I don't love the start of the season overall. You know, depending on who you're going to put into that second game. I've heard some people say that they're talking about putting like a top 10 caliber team into that week 2. I hope that that's not the case. Somebody even said, I saw some crazy rumor like Tennessee that'd be nonsense. If you put a team that you can dominate in there at week 2, that's a little better. But I mean, you're talking about you're going to have a new starting quarterback, and we'll address that later with the question as well. But you're going to play at Miami on the road. Well, guess what? Miami's going to have a new starting quarterback next year as well because Cam Ward's going to be gone after this year. They're going to lose plenty of players. They're going to get some of the portal. They're going to have some new talented recruits just like Notre Dame will. So it's going to be a challenging game in the opener. Then you have right now you have an open week between that and the next week, which is Texas A&M at home. Then you have Purdue at home. Then you're at Arkansas. Then you have Boise State at home before your next potential bye. Notre Dame better leave a break in there between Boise and USC because they better not have a 6-game stretch. They better have nothing more than a 6-game stretch to start the season that includes at Miami, at Arkansas, home against Texas A&M, and home against Boise State, plus Purdue and whoever else you have there. Like that's my thing is I don't have a problem with playing tough teams. You need to play tough teams. Miami's going to be the very least Miami's going to finish this year probably in the top 15, if not the top 10. A&M's going to finish this year in the top 15, most likely, if not the top 10. Boise State's going to finish the year in the top 25. Arkansas is a very talented team who just, beat Tennessee at home. And some people think they're going to win, have another big upset this weekend at home against Ole Miss. You play at Boston College, who's looking much better under Bill O'Brien than I thought they were. You got to play at Pittsburgh, who's currently undefeated and ranked in the top 25. You get Navy, obviously, at home. You get USC at home. You get NC State at home. You get Syracuse. It's a challenging schedule. The worst team on your schedule other than Purdue right now for next year, looking at where teams are now, is NC State. That's a rough schedule. So if you add a 12th game against another Power 4, a team like that, you're stupid, to be honest with you. It needs to be a team that you can dominate. Don't play MAC teams. You better freaking have a MAC team in there that you can dominate, not a good MAC team, but a crap MAC team. You're going to need that kind of warm-up game in between Miami and Texas A&M to work out some kinks. If you're going to go throw a new first-time starter into 4 straight games against Power 5 teams, actually be 5 straight games against Power 5 teams start the season, that is a failure of doing your job. And doing your job is building a challenging schedule that prepares you to go make a run in the postseason, but not creating such a challenging schedule that your players are worn out by the end of September, and they'd still have 11 freaking games to play if you're going to win a title. You can't schedule like they did back in the 80s or 90s or whenever people believed that Notre Dame would schedule great games every week, because back then you'd get through the regular season, you'd have a month off, and you'd play 1 game for the title. Now you get 3 weeks off, and then you got to play 4 more games if you want to win a title. And you're going to have your team fatigued by the end of September if you put another challenging game in there. So they better put something in there that's pretty much a cakewalk that they can have the starters out halftime, third quarter is what they better do in that number 2 game, Trev, because otherwise your schedule is just there's one thing to have a challenging schedule. It's another thing to set yourself up for failure, and setting yourself up for failure isn't necessarily the 12 teams that you play per se, although it can get a little bit nuts. But it's when do you play them? How do you slate them? Like the way that they had last year's schedule set up, it's not that those teams are too hard. It was the gauntlet of 8 straight games that included 4 straight games against Ohio State, Duke, Louisville, and USC in 4 straight weeks, 2 of those games on the road, all of them at night. That to me is it's not the teams you play, it's how you schedule them. And if they don't have a cakewalk team in there in week 2 and then have a bye week in between Boise and USC, then whoever's responsible for making these schedules needs to be reprimanded harshly for setting your team up for failure and your players up for injury, if we're being honest about it, because playing that many games in a row, we saw this last year, guys started falling late in the year. Mitchell Evans goes down, Pat Coogan goes down, Zeke Correll goes down. They started having all these injuries late in the year, and it's not a coincidence that it came after a grueling 8 straight games against you also had NC State in that 8-game stretch as well. You had to go play in Ireland during that 8-game stretch. It was a poorly constructed schedule. This year's schedule was constructed very well, in my opinion, from great early season start and then winnable games after that. Of course, Notre Dame drops the game against Northern Illinois, but that's not the scheduler's fault. Like, that's not Jack Swarbrick or whoever put that schedule together that you couldn't beat Northern Illinois at home, right? But then you had 5 games, bye week, 3 games, bye week, 4 games. That's how Notre Dame should be scheduling on a relatively regular basis.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's this notion that in order to get any sort of recognition with committees, with whatever, that you just have to play this gauntlet of a schedule. And honestly, you don't. Like, I mean, look at some teams this year and some teams from last year, right? Michigan was thought very highly of last year. They didn't play a single ranked opponent until week 10. Miami might get away this entire season without playing an opponent ranked in the top 25 until they reach the ACC championship game.
Right, because they don't play Pitt, right? And they don't play SMU.
Yeah. Nope. They don't play Pitt. They don't play SMU. They don't play Clemson in the regular season. So there's a chance Miami runs the table at 12-0, and they aren't playing a team that was in the top 25, right? They are playing opponents who at one point in time were. But there's this notion that every week, if you're going to get recognition from strength of schedule, you have to have a schedule that looks like Florida's from this year. And that's just not the case, right? So I am a big proponent that I do think that you need to be battle tested. Brian, you and I talked about it a lot yesterday. The reason why some of these teams are on upset alert is because the teams that they are facing that might not have as impressive of an overall record as them are more battle tested than them. That's what makes Louisville Clemson so interesting. That's what makes Texas Tech, that game, so interesting. That's it, right? So it's going to be interesting to see. I think that Notre Dame needs to play a tougher schedule, like with some of these opponents on it, but you hit the nail on the head. It's when and where you schedule. Because there is right now, 6 consecutive games where you could be playing, potentially 5 of those teams might be ranked. Right.
Yeah, if they schedule somebody challenging in that week 2 slate, like some people are talking about, then that means 5 of your first 6 opponents would be, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4 of your first 7 opponents. No, hold on. So Miami, whoever they'd have in week 2, Texas A&M, Purdue, Arkansas, Boise. So yeah, 4 of your first 6 opponents would be teams that were ranked last year. And then hopefully you have a bye week. And then you come back and you've got what? You've got USC.
Mm-hmm.
And then between USC and Navy, you're going to fit 2 games that are going to be 2 of those spots are going to have to go to a group of either BC, NC State, Syracuse, or Pitt. 3 of those 4 teams have been ranked at some point in time this season. So there's you talk about Florida's crazy schedule. At least Florida had Samford in between Miami and Texas A&M.
100%.
Right? You still need those kind of games. Oh, but look at the schedule Georgia plays. Yeah, Georgia's schedule's nuts this year, but let's not forget that Georgia also has some games in there that, are games that they're gonna coast. You know what I mean? So, like, they've got Austin P in there. They got Charlotte in there. Talking about next season's schedule. Actually, next year they have Georgia. This year they had Tennessee Tech on their schedule. They have UMass on their schedule. So even the gauntlet they have that includes Clemson, Georgia Tech out of conference, at Ole Miss, at Alabama, at Texas, home against Tennessee. It's a brutal schedule, but they also have Tennessee Tech at home. They also have UMass at home. So there are some games in there that are like, okay, we're going to, it's kind of a week to recover a little bit type of game. So there needs to be that kind of common sense in this schedule, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
All right, let's get to a question here from Andrew Burke, the Super Chat.
Thank you for the Super Chat, Andrew. Since 2000, name one Notre Dame player from each position group that maximized their potential.
Oh, quarterback Ian Book. I think it was as good as he was going to be, which is that is a compliment. Kyron Williams at running back. It's a good one. Receiver. There's a couple. Chris Fink is one that comes to mind since 2000. Jeff Samardzija is another one that comes to mind at Notre Dame that was that way. Tight end. I mean, there's a lot more of those. Tyler Eifert. Hard to me imagine Tyler Eifert been any better than he was. They've had a lot of those. Tyler Eifert, Michael Mayer, Cole Kmet, Durham Smythe. Even guys who weren't maybe dominant players. Durham Smythe comes just off the top of my head. Offensive line, again, pick an offensive lineman that played for Harry Hiestand, and that's an offensive lineman that maximized his potential. I mean, Liam Eichenberg, Robert Hainsey, Mike McGlinchey, Quentin Nelson, Ronnie Stanley, Nick Martin. I mean, there's that long list of guys. Alex Bars, before he got hurt, was in that category. Joe Walt. I don't know how much better Joe Walt could have been, who's a guy that Jeff Quinn coached, and then obviously Coach Hiestand had for a year, or Jeff Quinn recruited, and then Coach Hiestand had for a year, and then Coach Rudolph had for a year. So it's a long list, Trev. Offensively, anyone else that would kind of popped in your head besides the guys I just mentioned?
No, I was going to say Samardzija, Durham Smythe, going back, for Samardzija going back to 05, 06. Nobody was really thinking a lot of him because I had Maurice Stovall and Rima McKnight. But, I mean, it's a long list of guys, put it that way, on the offensive side. For sure. Offensive lineman, pick one, right? I mean, tight end, same thing, pick one. Kyron Williams was going to be my running back that maximized his potential. I was going to say like him or Josh Adams.
Tony Jones is another one. That's another one. Tony Jones did Audric.
Yeah.
During the stretch. Darius Walker is one during the 2000s. If you want to look at some running backs in the 2000s that did, I think Darius Walker was outstanding and got the most out of his ability at Notre Dame. He was like a 4.7 40, and he had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons and was one of the most prolific pass catchers in Notre Dame history for a running back. So, I mean, that would be
Walker's in there.
Ryan Grant. I think Ryan Grant got the most out of his ability at Notre Dame, and in the NFL. He was surprisingly an NFL guy to me. Defensively, Trevor. I mean, that since 2000, Trevor Laws and Derek Landry were an inside duo that I think got the most out of their ability. Oh boy. Let's see. More recently, I mean, it's hard for me to. I mean, honestly, the guy at the top of that list for me, the very top of that list for me, is Kurt Hinish.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about getting the most out of your career, and the COVID year let him get a fifth year, where he actually played all 5 years. It's hard for me to really think of anybody more than Kurt Hinish, because again, it's not about who are the best players, it's who maximize their potential the most. And for Kurt Hinish to have been a 5-year, and I don't mean player at Notre Dame. I don't mean like, oh, he didn't deserve to be on scholarship, like he was a borderline walk-on. No, I'm talking about that. He was in the rotation from the moment he arrived in Notre Dame till the end of his career for 5 years. You know what I mean? And he's usually the kind of kid that you think comes in red shirts for a year, his third string for his second year, and then by year 3 gets a little bit of burn, and then year 4 and 5 he becomes maybe a starter rotation guy. He was a rotation guy from day one. It's hard for me to think of anybody beyond that one. And
yeah. I think Kurt Hinish sits at the top of that list. I like Khalid Kareem in that list.
He was, to me, the most underappreciated defensive lineman for Notre Dame in the last decade.
Yeah.
He was so good, and he never gets talked. He rarely gets talked about. I mean, people talk about Julian Aguar, and I'm like, Julian Aguar was a flashy player, but he wasn't nearly as consistently impactful or in clutch moments as impactful as what Khalid Kareem was at Notre Dame. He was so underrated at Notre Dame. So underrated at Notre Dame. Linebacker, I mean, it's very recent. J.D. Bertrand. He had a heck of a career at Notre Dame. Drew White, I mean, he's another one. Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah is another one because, he was a guy that I loved. I gave him a 4.5-star upside grade coming in, but I thought he would need 5 years to get there, and he really didn't. I mean, he got there in year 3. He was really impactful in 2020, and then, of course, in 2019, and then, of course, in 2020 has just a brilliant All-American Butkus Award-winning type of year. It's hard for me to think his career, he could have got much more out of him in his career. I have to think back to Brandon Hoyt. If you want to go back in the day, Brandon Hoyt, Corey Mays were two guys that I just thought were loved to watch play. They got everything out of their ability. They were really Notre Dame missed those two guys big time in 2006. Like people talk about, you lost this guy and that guy. Like the biggest losses Notre Dame had from 2005 to 2006 was losing Brandon Hoyt and Corey Mays up the middle of that defense. That was by far the two biggest losses from 2005 to 2006 on defense. Because they were not only like tough, but they were not only good players, but they were like tough. They were like the heartbeat of your defense. You know what I mean? They were those guys that you just looked at and were like, man, I better bring it today, or Brandon's going to be in my face, or Corey's going to be in my face. You know what I mean? Like those glue guys. Loved watching them play. Anyone else pop in your head at linebacker?
No, I was going to say Drew White. I like that you brought him up. I'm going year by year. 2005 is kind of where my knowledge of the team starts. Brandon Hoyt and Corey Mays were awesome. I mean, the following year, what they replaced, Mo Crum was still there. Then they made Travis Thomas a linebacker.
Converted him to, yeah.
And then Joe Brockington was also a linebacker that year that was kind of came on and off. No, that's man, I think Drew Tranquil, once you moved him to linebacker.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Drew Tranquil when you moved him to linebacker. And then for like another D lineman that I was thinking about, like Stephon Tuitt was a guy that I think maximized his. He was really good in 2012. No, nobody else that I can think of from a linebacking standpoint.
Secondary wise, Julian Love is one who got everything out of his ability. Jalen Elliott, Alohi Gilman. There's been a lot of those recently. Those are guys that just kind of pop in my mind. Jordan Clark this year is definitely a guy that's getting everything out of his potential. He's doing an excellent job in that regard. Trying to think of Alohi Gilman. Yep. Bennett Jackson was one during the BK era that I felt that way about. He was certainly that kind of guy. During the Charlie Weiss era, what was the kid? Kyle McCarthy.
Yeah,
he was one. I mean, that guy was 100+ tackle guy. Like he didn't have nearly as much talent as his brother Dan did. If Dan McCarthy didn't have injuries, that guy would have been a stud at Notre Dame. He would have been such a stud at Notre Dame if he didn't have all those injuries. But Kyle was a heck of a player too, man. Who?
Harrison Smith.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to think he could have been any better. That's for darn sure. Chinedum and Ndukwe, I thought.
Yeah.
You consider how he came as a receiver, and then they moved him to defense, and I thought he was another guy that was like that. Another one of those glue guys. Somebody said Capron Lewis Moore. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Shane Walton. That's a good one. From back in the day. Dan Fox. I don't know. I don't agree with Dan Fox because I think Notre Dame misused Dan Fox. I think there's other things they could have done with him to maybe get a little bit more out of him. So I don't know that I would put Dan Fox in that category, in my opinion. So yeah, it's an interesting list. It's a very interesting list. Somebody said Robert Blanton, Theo Riddick. Those are some good ones. Yeah, those are some good ones.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Joe Schmidt. I mean, yeah, pre-injury Joe Schmidt, you got everything. Like 2015, Joe Schmidt was not getting the most out of his potential, but it was because of the injury. He couldn't. If he would have been able to, like, let's say, sit out a year and then maybe come back in 2016, maybe he'd have been better because he'd have been a year removed from a devastating injury. But pre-Navy injury of 2014, Joe Schmidt would have been one of those guys as well. Greer Martini, that's a good one. He's one. Tavon Coney. There's been a decent number of linebackers that I think they've gotten everything. Like Tavon Coney went undrafted, never played a snap in the NFL. But if you look at his numbers for two really good Notre Dame teams in 2017 and 2018, think about that, Trevor. In Tavon Coney's last 2 years at Notre Dame, they went 22-4. And every team that beat them was a top 5 team. In 2017, 2017, that's not true. Top 10 team when they played. Miami was a top 10 team. Georgia ended up being a top 10 team. So at least 2 of those teams. I'm thinking 15 and 18. But in that 2-year stretch, Tavon Coney had, 239 tackles in those 2 years. And he had 22 tackles for loss and 7 sacks in those 2 years. That's
decent.
Good.
Yeah.
That's
a decent couple of years at the office. Man. Yeah, I can't think of many more that. If we're talking about just like got the most out of them while they were at Notre Dame, it sucks because I wish Kyle Hamilton didn't have some of the injuries that he had towards the end of his career. Trying to think of other safeties or other DBs. Cole Luke.
No, I actually don't. No, I don't put him in there because I think Brian Van Gorder ruined him. Cole Luke got progressively worse as he got older because remember how good he was in 2014?
Yeah.
And he got worse and worse his next 2 years because Brian Van Gorder is a terrible football coach. You know what I forgot? You mentioned being at that Louisville-Clemson game. Somebody in the chat reminded us of this. Do you know who the defensive coordinator was for Louisville when Clemson hung 77 on him?
Oh, yeah, BVG.
Brian Van Gorder. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, I can't think of many other people. Tom Zibikowski.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yep.
Yeah, I can't think of many more outside of that.
Those are good ones.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get some more super chats.
Another super chat from Tyler Evans. Thank you, Tyler. In your opinion, how many schools' athletic directors and fan bases would like to be independent like Notre Dame if money was not an issue? And do you have any schools in mind?
We've actually talked about this. Ohio State I would guarantee would love to be independent if they could be. Schedule whoever you want, do whatever you want. You're going to rake in money, you get your own TV contract. And if money wasn't an issue, well, actually, you know what? I take that back. If money wasn't an issue, I think everyone but Notre Dame would like to be in a conference. If money wasn't an issue, because you can better schedule your games. You have regional opponents to play. I think if money wasn't an issue, you'd have the old Southwest Conference would be back, the Big East would be back, the Big Eight would be back. You'd have the Mountain West would probably get some. Honestly, if money wasn't an issue, you'd have like 9 or 10 leagues, and they'd be smaller leagues. You can better regulate your schedule that way. You get to play for conference championships, all those type of things. And you kind of go back to football being like what it used to be. I'm not saying that in any sort of like, oh, it was so glorious back. I'm just saying like that's what it would be. The only reason you're doing the stuff you're doing now is because of money. The only reason you have a 16 to 18 team leagues is because of money. And if money was, and the only reason you'd want to be independent if you were in Ohio State or Michigan or Alabama would be because of money. So actually, I take that back because I don't think most teams would want to be independent if money wasn't an issue. That, you know what I mean? And because the reason I've said people would want to be independent is if they could make the money Notre Dame was making, then they would choose to be independent and not have to split things with the leagues and things like that. If money wasn't an issue, meaning like, we weren't having these crazy deals and everybody pretty much got the same thing. I think most teams would like to be in the league, and I think they'd like to go back to the way the leagues used to be, where it cut down on travel costs. It made your scheduling a lot easier. It just was, you had things, it was just a lot different. You know what I mean? It was a lot different era, Trevor. And this is what before your time, because it had already started for a decade by the time you were watching football. We were a decade in. And like young people like you, it's like Sean Davis and I will talk about this. Young people like you don't realize this. In 1988, when Notre Dame won a national championship, 3 of the top 5 teams in the country that year were independents. Notre Dame, Florida State, and Miami were all independent. And in the 1980s, independents won more national championships than any conference, because Miami won 2, Notre Dame won 1. Actually, Miami won 3, Notre Dame won 1, and Penn State won 2. Penn State was also an independent back then. So 6 of the 10 championships that decade from 1980 to 1989 were won by independent teams.
I did not know that.
And that was before. So like in the 1980s, there was that court case, I believe it was in 1984, where basically the NCAA lost the ability to kind of handle all the TV. NCAA got all the TV money, and they dealt with all that stuff. And then late 80s, you started, like early 90s, you started to see the shift. So Notre Dame got their deal. Florida State went to the ACC. Miami went to the Big East. Penn State went to the Big Ten. The Southwest Conference blew up. Arkansas left for the SEC. And I'm sure there was one other one in the early 90s. But like they had the Southwest, some of the teams in the Southwest went up to the Big 8. That became the Big 12. It blew all this stuff up, and it was all based on the TV money, which kind of took some years to kind of get going once that court settlement in the 80s took place. I think it was the University of Oklahoma, I believe, is the one that started that whole thing. So yeah, it would be very different. So to his question, if money wasn't an issue, I think most teams would like to be in a conference, but a far more regional based conference that makes a lot more sense in regards to reducing travel, not so much for football, but for every other sport that has to pay insane money to be part of a league. Now, I do think there might be some teams that would want to be, like if Florida State could be independent in football, if money wasn't an issue, and stay in the ACC for its other sports, I think they'd like to do that. Like the old ACC, where there wasn't Boston and Pittsburgh and, teams way up north that they'd have to go play, but where like the most northern teams like Virginia, yeah, I think they'd probably like to be part of that. But overall, I think most teams would probably want to be in a conference if money wasn't an issue.
Yeah, the lens that I look at it through is like if just their football team could be independent, like what you said, but their other sports could remain. The only ones that make sense to me, if money's not a factor, like travel costs aren't a factor or anything like that, would be like the lesser schools within bigger conferences, because in that way they're not handicapped every year by saying, well, I mean, they can basically look at their schedule and say, that's probably a loss. That's probably a loss. Like think of like if Northwestern was independent and every single year they didn't have to look at their schedule. It's like, well, we have to play Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, USC, and Michigan this year. Like instead of being handicapped by playing 8 conference schedules in a tough conference that you were nowhere near the top of. I could see that, but I think it would more align with what you were saying, especially for like the bigger name teams like the Ohio States, the Penn States, the Alabamas, the Georgias, stuff like that. Super chat from Aiden Benami. Thank you, Aiden. Who covers Ohio State at -3, Oregon at -14, IU at -7.5, or Texas A&M at -3.5?
Based on our predictions, I have Ohio State covering. I have Texas A&M covering. IU -7.5. I actually don't have them covering, and I think Oregon covers. I hope they don't, but I think Oregon covers.
Yeah, I think I'm the exact same. The exact same with you. I think out of all those that might not, despite what my predictions are, I could see. I think the most likely to not cover is IU, I think, out of who they play. Because, I mean, if we're talking about like Ohio State not covering at -3, like that, I mean, they're potentially losing that game. Texas A&M not covering at -3.5, they're potentially losing that game. But I could see the IU game being a 3-point game on the road, but them still winning. So,
Good one. Got some more super chats to get to from my guy John A1.
Super chat from John A1. Thank you, John. With Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr not getting any real work so far, how big of an advantage does Steve Angeli have going into spring camp? If a young quarterback wins the job, does it point to a slow start in 2025?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. Most of the people I talk to, I don't think it really matters, honestly. Yes, those young guys should be getting work. There's no question. I think it's ridiculous that Kenny Minchie hasn't played in the last 2 blowouts. It's ridiculous he didn't play against Stanford, and it's ridiculous he didn't play against Navy, in my opinion. Like, I just think that was very poor planning by the Notre Dame coaching staff. I think it was looks. Yes, your backup quarterback needs work. Steve's gotten a lot of work this year. He got a lot of work last year. You know who he is. So yeah, give him a series and then let Kenny get some work in. Because my whole thing is, you still have 8 games to play. If Riley Leonard goes down in a game, now you've got however many games you have to play with now Kenny Minchie as your backup. Well, what if Steve Angeli goes down in the postseason? Do you really want Kenny Minchie getting he's played one series against Purdue back in early September as being his only action? That's nonsense. I think they know that Steve's not the quarterback next year, which makes it even more ridiculous that they refuse to get either one of those 2 guys some work. Now, I know why CJ's not, because he's got an injury he's dealing with. But Kenny Minchie should flat out be getting some work right now, in my opinion. And I think it's a mistake that they have not gotten him more work. So do I think Steve has an advantage? He'll have an advantage when spring starts. I would expect Steve to take the first snaps with the first-team offense in the spring. I would be surprised if he didn't. I don't think his advantage goes very long, however, as long as those other quarterbacks are healthy. In regard to the slow start, no, it doesn't. It doesn't point to a slow start. Number one, the only way it points to a slow start is if they play Steve. Like if Marcus Freeman makes the executive decision, say, well, we got 2 tough teams. We're going to go with these experienced players. He's not going to like me very much in next August and September if that's the decision that he makes. But if they play one of the younger players, it's like, well, you're going to have a really good offensive line. You're going to have arguably the best returning backfield in all of college football, hopefully. You're going to have a pretty talented receiver tight end room that's going to be now older. And you're still going to have one heck of a defense. I mean, yeah, they're going to lose this guy and this guy. Yeah, they are going to lose some guys on defense. So's Miami, so's Texas A&M, right? You get some portal guys to fill some of those holes, but you're still going to come back with a secondary next year. You're going to lose Xavier Watts. That's going to be a bummer. But you're still going to bring back not Benjamin Morrison. Hopefully Benjamin Morrison, but you're still going to bring back Christian Gray and Don Schuler and Leonard Moore and a great freshman class. And Luke Tallis is going to be a junior, and Kennedy Urlacher is going to be going into second year. Your linebacking core is going to be ridiculous next season. Your defensive ends are going to be really good next season. So they're not going to be in any different situation than the teams they're playing early in the season are going to be in, with losing some guys and having to replace some guys with younger guys and having to replace other guys with portal guys and the expectation still go out there and win all your games. So I'm not someone who's going to be like, well, the quarterback's young. So look, the quarterback's not going to be a true freshman. So you're going to have a guy that's going to have been in your system for at least a year. So I don't want to hear excuse. And who's Miami's quarterback going to be next year? It's not going to be Cam Ward. So they're going to have a new quarterback too. So no, you may look different. You may not rely on your quarterback as much early as you will maybe later in the season. That's fine. That's okay. That's why you recruit so well at all those other positions, is so you can be in a situation to be like that. So, but at the end of the day, you got to split those 2 games at the very least. Miami and A&M. You split those 2 games, you're doing okay. As far as positioning yourself for a playoff berth, as long as you don't do something stupid like schedule some other top 10 to 15 caliber team in between them. As long as you don't do something stupid like that, then you start season 2-1. As long as that loss is competitive to a highly ranked team, you keep winning. The quarterback can do better, more and more and more and more. And by the time you get to November, you're cooking. That's the key. So no, you're going into year 4 next year if you're Marcus Freeman. I'm not expecting you to, look like 2019 LSU, but I'm also not going to be like, well, it's a rebuilding year. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that stuff. Yeah, they're not going to be very young next year, but they're going to be really talented. And more experienced in a lot of places than they were this year, because a lot of that youth is going to have played a lot of football.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Steve holds the advantage just because he's been with the program the longest and he's gotten the most game minutes, but not from a skill set advantage, in my opinion. I mean, Kenny and CJ both spin the ball different. I think that's one thing that we can all agree on. And just because a quarterback is young does not equal a slow start. I mean, Notre Dame brought in a senior transfer this year who had over 22 starts in college football, and it was a slow start to the season. So just because he's a young quarterback doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be a slow start. So, but Brian, I agree with you. Super chat from Eric Carroll. Thank you, Eric. Brian, an issue raised by you often in recent seasons has been lack of urgency in the wide receiver routes. Is this something you feel has been addressed and corrected, or does it still need work?
That's a great question, Eric, and I'm glad you were paying attention to that for sure, because that's something that I was encouraged by this past weekend, Trevor. And if you're a member of the board, and Eric, I think you are, that's why I want people to go watch that pass game breakdown. Because Trevor, that was the thing that I noticed. I mean, obviously, the first thing you notice is I'm looking at the line and I'm watching how they performed, and you watch Riley going through his progressions. And then when you kind of, so I kind of like segment it all, right? Like I'll watch the line, how they played. I'll watch the quarterback and how he read the defense, so how the route combinations working against the defense. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll actually then study the technical aspects of the wide receivers. Before I could even get to me studying that part of the pass game breakdown, it was popping on film. Like, wow. Like I'm watching, because I know where the ball's going on that in cut to Jordan Faison early in the game that he dropped. I know where the ball's going, so I'm looking at that route. But out of the corner of my eye on the far side of the screen, I'm seeing Bo Collins just running by a dude on a post route for what could have been a big play. And I'm like, oh, okay, so like it's popping. I'm you can't help but watch Jaden Greathouse on that first route and be like, dude, that was a phenomenal route. You know what I mean? And then you watch Jordan Faison just look for work on that fourth down. I mean, Trevor, you saw the breakdown, right? Like they had that play covered. Navy had the perfect call for that fourth down play. But line gave Riley time. Riley kept his eyes downfield, and Jordan just said, I got to go get open, man. That's an urgency, right? If you don't have urgency, you take a couple seconds before you think, oh, shoot, I got to go. He looked at that guy and then converted, said, okay, let me go look for work, and then climbs behind the guy. It was just a great job. So we saw such a better job of that on Saturday. Bo Collins on his touchdown pass, he saw the blown coverage from the snap, and he just flies downfield fast. Like not like, oh, what's going on? Just boom, and gets it in for the touchdown. So we saw such a better job of that group. Chris Mitchell had some of that. So I don't know if it was the game plan just had them fired up. I don't know if the lessons Mike Brown's finally teaching are finally sinking in. But we saw them play with that with much greater against Navy. Now, the key, Trevor, is it can't just be a one-off. It can't just be, well, they played great against Navy, but then we don't see that in the next 4 games.
Yeah, I agree. For your super chat, Eric, is it something that I think has been addressed? Yes. Do I think it still needs work? Yes. And is it being corrected? It's in the process of it, but it's hard, to Brian's point, to just look at one game where they played with really good urgency and really good explosion off the line and look at that one game and say, yep, they fixed it. They're going to be fantastic for the rest of the season. It's about consistency and stacking it. And I'm going to be looking forward to seeing some more pass game breakdowns for the Final 4 games going into the playoffs. But I think this will be a really fun question to revisit at the end of the regular season, Eric, to look and see if it has been fully corrected. But they are taking the right steps. It's not like it was last year of there's lack of urgency off the line. Do I think it's been addressed? Maybe. Is being corrected? No. So I'm interested to see what this question is going to look like again at the end of the season.
Yeah, it's going to be very, very interesting. That's going to be the key. You nailed it.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to keep building. Mm-hmm. Once that light goes on, it needs to stay on.
Mm-hmm. Snapchat from T-Bone. Thank you, T-Bone. First time super chat, long time listener. Do you think it's even possible for Jeremiah Love to win a Heisman based off of how the offense operates? And if he can't get one in the offseason in this offense, appreciate your work.
Oh, I absolutely think he can. I absolutely think he can win one. Because I think he can, as he evolves in the offense, you could see where he's never going to have like the rushing yards that a Derrick Henry has and a Ashton Jonty has and all these other guys have, right, that win Heisman's at running back. He's not going to have that. but I could see him having 1,400 yards rushing, 500-600 yards receiving. Maybe he's their kick returner next year, takes a couple back to the house. You know, he has 20 touchdowns, and Notre Dame's number 1 team in the country, or number 2, 3 team in the country. It's possible. It's just a award that's so skewed for running backs. It's just very hard for, and this is what you were talking about the other day, Trevor, when we were having that conversation about who's going to win the Heisman Trophy, and your point was valid. Like, the last Heisman Trophy winner at running back had ridiculously insane numbers. It just was like, I mean, come on. How does that guy not win the Heisman Trophy when his numbers are that insane? You know what I mean? And we've seen other backs kind of put up insane numbers and not even get sniffed for the Heisman Trophy, you know? And, that's just kind of how it is. Part of that's bad luck. I mean, in 2019, you had 3 guys that in a lot of years would have maybe been Heisman contenders at running back, and Jonathan Taylor, J.K. Dobbins, and Chuba Hubbard, who all had over 2,000 yards, phenomenal players. But that's the year Joe Burrow won the Heisman. Well, as good as they were, I don't really care. Joe Burrow was going to win the Heisman Trophy that year and should have won the Heisman Trophy that year.
Right.
Because as good as their numbers were, they weren't in the same league as what he was doing. You look at the 2018 season, that to me is more than any year shows me why the Heisman Trophy is just a ridiculously stupid trophy when you're talking about running backs. Because that season, Jonathan Taylor had an insane season in 2018. He had 307 carries, 2,194 yards, 16 rushing touchdowns, averaged over 7 yards a carry. That season in big games, he had over 100. He had 113 yards against Iowa, who was ranked. He had 101 yards on the road against Michigan. He had, 185 yards at Penn State. He had 321 yards against Purdue. Goes in the bowl game, has 205 yards. That was after the trophy had been announced. I mean, the guy just had an absolutely monster season, and he finishes 9th in Heisman Trophy voting that season. And then you have Travis Etienne that season in 2018, has 1,658 rushing yards. Didn't have quite that much at the end of the regular season when the trophy was awarded. He had about 190 some yards in the postseason. So he would have had some monster games that year. He had the 200-yard game against Clemson in that comeback win. He was a big part of that. Went off in the game you watched, Trevor. But he also was a big-time receiving threat. Actually, no, he wasn't that year. Only had 2 touchdowns that year. I could have swore he was more used in that year. So guess I was wrong. But he had 1,658 yards, 24 touchdowns, finishes 7th in Heisman Trophy voting, behind Mackenzie Milton at UCF, who passed for 2,600 yards, behind Gardner Minshew, behind Will Grier, behind Dwayne Haskins. Now, none of those running backs, as good as they were, should have won the Heisman Trophy that year because Kyler Murray had an insane season with over 4,000 passing yards, and he also rushed for 1,000 yards. Like, they got the Heisman Trophy right that year. There's no doubt. But with all due respect, I wouldn't have voted for Tua over Jonathan Taylor. I mean, Tua was the quarterback on an absolutely loaded football team. Give Jonathan Taylor a similarly loaded team around him with a great offensive line and a quarterback that could protect him, and imagine what he would have done in 2018. It's a incredibly quarterback friendly year, and not only is it about Trevor. I mean, you talked about Derrick Henry, but also that year in 2015, I don't know that there was any quarterbacks that really warranted that type of conversation. That was before Baker really had his breakout where he was a big name. I mean, your top 2 guys that year were running backs. You had Derrick Henry and Christian McCaffrey were both insane that season. Deshaun Watson was at number 3. He was really good that year, really dynamic that year, but he wasn't quite the name. Clemson was just kind of coming onto the scene a little bit that year. So it's just an incredibly skewed trophy towards quarterbacks that you need not only crazy numbers, but you also need to be at a big-time school, because how are his numbers that much better than Jonathan Taylor's? But he was at Bama, Jonathan Taylor's at Wisconsin. That's the difference. If Jonathan Taylor would have had the same numbers he put up, but he played for Bama, he wouldn't have finished 9th in Heisman Trophy voting. He'd have finished a lot higher than that. So that's why to me, the Heisman Trophy is it's just an award I don't put a lot of as much stock in as I would in the past, especially for running backs, where I would say is like, can he win the Doak Walker Award at Notre Dame? That would be a much more important question to me. Can I say that one, Trevor? If Notre Dame's good enough for Jeremiah Love to be in the conversation, meaning top 5 team next year, most likely they're going to be talking about the quarterback, whoever the quarterback is, as a Heisman guy. It's just the only reason they even talked about Josh Adams in 2017 is because your quarterback was Brandon Wimbush. There's no way you're going to push for him to be in a Heisman Trophy conversation. Otherwise, like it would have been a quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I think the argument can be made on the flip side of the coin, almost, T-Bone. I mean, I think Jeremiah Love is in the right offensive system for him to get like national notice for the Heisman list, because I don't know how successful. I mean, I still think he would be successful, but I don't know how successful Jeremiah Love would be if he ran in an offense that was every single down you line up in 13 personnel and doing like lining up in similar formations than what they had at Wisconsin and when Jonathan Taylor was running behind that offensive line. I think for Jeremiah Love to be in Heisman contention, he has to be a threat on the ground and through the air, and I think he's in the perfect system for that. So I think it's possible, but man, Brian, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's just the Heisman Trophy is just such a skewed award. Rightfully so. There have been years where it should have been a quarterback, right? Joe Burrow in 2019, Baker when he won his, Lamar Jackson when he won his.
Kyler Murray in 18, I think, was very deserving of the Heisman Trophy. Cam Ward was deserving of the Heisman Trophy the year he won it.
Yeah.
No. I mean, there's certainly been years that was true.
Yeah,
but was Bryce Young the most dominant player in college football in 2022, 2021? I don't know.
Meh.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know.
Yeah.
He was very productive, but again, not a great schedule that year. Put up big numbers. I don't know. I also find it funny that Lamar Jackson put up even better numbers in 2017 than he did in 2016 and finished third in Heisman Trophy voting. I've always found that to be kind of ironic a little bit, but like Marcus Mariota in 2014, he was really dynamic, but Melvin Gordon rushed for over 2,500 yards and 29 touchdowns that year in the Big Ten, and finished a distant second, got doubled up by Marcus Mariota, who dominated a crap Pac-10, Pac-12 league back then. Marcus Mariota was phenomenal. But how does the guy that rushes for 2,600 yards not get it closer, to being number one? It's a very quarterback dominant year. Here's A.J. McCarron finishing second in 2013 behind Jameis Williams, when Andre Williams from Boston College had 2,100 yards and 18 touchdowns. I mean, come on, dude.
Yeah.
He wasn't just nearly as good of a running back or player as Andre Williams. But if Andre Williams would have done what he did at Alabama or Georgia or Notre Dame or Ohio State, he would not have finished fourth in the Heisman Trophy voting behind Jordan Lynch. Come on.
Mm-hmm.
Come on. It's not a very running back friendly thing. I mean, honestly, I think the most dominant player in college football in 2021 was a defensive player. And we're definitely not going to give a defensive player the Heisman Trophy unless he's playing on offense.
I was just about to say unless he is making an impact on offense or scoring points. Yeah.
Does Charles Woodson win the Heisman in 1998 or is it 97? Was it 97? If he's not playing offense a little bit and also special teams, like, does he not? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's right. My whole point is, you could say, oh, well, a defensive player's won it. Yeah, only because he was playing some offense and returning punts and, things like that. It's not because, he had 11 catches for 231 yards in 1997. You know what I mean? Like, if you take those away, 2 touchdowns there, you take away his punt return for a touchdown. I think that came against Ohio State. Does he beat Peyton Manning out for the Heisman Trophy? I don't think so. Because if you're just going to give it to a defensive back for just being a phenomenal defensive back, then there'd be other guys that would have won it. I also think that's why I always felt like Champ Bailey got a little bit screwed in 1998, if I'm being completely honest with you. Because Champ Bailey, people talk about Travis Hunter and what he's doing is so unique. Champ Bailey did that back in 1998, man. Like, Champ Bailey finished 7th in the Heisman Trophy voting that year. He was the best cornerback in college football. He also had 47 catches for 744 yards. He had 16 carries for 84 yards. He also returned 12 punts for 261 or 12 kickoffs for 261 yards. Like, Champ was Travis Hunter 25, 26 years ago. You know what I mean? But he was actually an elite corner, not just an elite athlete that was a great receiver and a good corner.
Yeah.
He was, you know what I mean? So, and Tommy, to your question, no, Desmond Howard did not deserve his Heisman Trophy. So, yeah. But like, and I'm not saying Charles Woodson shouldn't have won the Heisman Trophy. That's not the point. The point is they're not going to give it to a defensive player unless he's playing offense. I mean, because like if Ndamukong Suh is not going to win the Heisman Trophy, what was it? Was it 09, 08? What was the year that Ndamukong had that just insane season? Was it 09 or 010? Let me go find that. It was 09. And Ndamukong Suh had just an insane season. And he finished, I think, 4th in Heisman Trophy voting. Hold on a second. It was 09. He had, let's see here. Let me go find Ndamukong's college stats. He had 14. He had, let's see here, 21 tackles for loss, 14 sacks, 85 tackles that year. And he was just by far the most dominant player in college football that year. And he finished 4th in Heisman Trophy voting. What was the year that Aaron Donald had his insane year? Was it 13? I think it was 2013. Aaron Donald had an insanely good year. And he wasn't even in the top 10. Let me go find it real quick. Aaron Donald college stats. Give me a second. So Aaron Donald in 2013 at a Power 5 school had 29 tackles for loss, 11 sacks, and he didn't even finish in the top 10 of Heisman Trophy voting. Like Bryce Petty from Baylor was in there. Like, come on. Like, just name it a quarterback award and just be done with it.
Yep.
Just be done with it. Julius Peppers had a year too where you're like, dude, that guy should have been in the Heisman Trophy conversation. Let me go find that because he had a year, oh man, where Julius Peppers had just insane. He was just insanely good. Insanely good. Let's see here. Where are his? Okay, they don't have his. Where's his tackle numbers? You knuckleheads. He had 3 interceptions in 2001. Julius Peppers had 3 interceptions. Where are his tackle numbers? Give me a second. Nah, those knuckleheads, they don't have his tackle numbers, but he had some just crazy numbers in 2001. So I'm going to see if I can find them as we move on to other questions. But yeah, good first question, man. Whenever you can get us kind of going on a long thing, that's a good first question, T-Bone. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah, that was a good question. All righty. Mailbag question from Aiden Benami. Do you think Kedron should be getting more snaps? Yes, we want the best back, whoever gives us the best chance to win to play.
I'm okay with where they are right now. I mean, you could say, hey, I want him to get more goal line snaps, but Jeremiah Love's proven to be a pretty good goal line running back. I mean, he can hammer it when he needs to. He finds holes and he can hit it with speed. I mean, there's a reason he scored a touchdown in every game. My issue with Kedron playing more was more about love Devin Ford, great kid, great story, but when you're in those mop-up minutes, you should not be giving him touches. Mm-hmm. Those need to be going to Kedron and Aeneas. Mm-hmm. That was my only question. And that's exactly what they did against Navy. The Navy game was perfect. Perfect. Because you dominate for 3 quarters, you get a big lead, and then Kedron comes in and he gets 10 carries in the 4th quarter. It's perfect. It was perfect. That's where that was my only issue with Kedron not playing more. When you've got Jeremiah Love and you've got Jadarian Price, and Aeneas Williams is just a better third down back than Kedron, I think, is a better pure running back. He's a better first and second down running back than Aeneas. Not by a ton, but he is. But Aeneas is a great third down back because he's a legitimate weapon in the pass game. He can hurt you in the run game, but he's proven to be a pretty good pass blocker as well. So I'm comfortable with where they are, with the exception of, and this is meant to be no disrespect to Devin Ford, who is just an awesome team player. But when you get in those 4th quarter moments, Kedron needed to be the one that was getting those touches against Stanford and some of those other games, exactly like they did against Navy. So, like, again, If they'd have been doing all year what they did against Navy in the fourth quarter, I'm perfectly happy with how they're doing running back this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think Kedron should be getting more snaps, and that has nothing to do with Kedron Young. It just has to do with who's in front of him, right? Because you start having the conversation of who should he be taking snaps away from, right? Because and as much as I love Kedron Young, I think it's fair to say that there'd be a relatively high uproar if Kedron Young started taking snaps away from Jeremiah Love, right? So him not getting more snaps has nothing to do with his ability as a player, because in mop-up minutes, we've seen what Kedron Young is able to do, and he is a bulldozer of a running back, but not enough yet to be taking over snaps from Jadarian or from Jeremiah or Aeneas down and distance situation.
Yep. It just speaks volumes that a kid like Kedron Williams and Aeneas Williams, we're not sitting there talking about, like, why are these guys not playing more? They need to play more. We're not saying that because the two guys they have, Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, are just so good. And honestly, before the season, I would have said, I think that Kedron should play in the red zone in the goal line situations, just because. But Jeremiah Love has proven to be a really good goal line running back. Because again, he runs with power, but he also he can get real skinny and find those holes and then run through people. And like the cut he had, I was in the run game breakdown that I did on the board, Trevor, but that cutback he had on duo for a touchdown he made that play look way easier than it should have been. Because of just how, and he made it look like he made it look like it wasn't that big of a deal. Like it doesn't, but like that's not an easy cut to make the way he made it, Trevor. It just was a really impressive run. So those two guys are just dudes. The running back room at Notre Dame is like, I was having this conversation with somebody earlier today. It was a great conversation. Somebody brought up a question to me about, what Notre Dame should do at portal quarterback and stuff like that in 2024. It's a real good conversation. But and then I think I thought of it again when somebody talked about having a slow start in 2025. We're focusing too much on the quarterback and not enough on the fact that Notre Dame should have a really good O-line next year and the best backfield in college football. As long as this group stays together, they should have the best backfield in college football next year. Let those guys carry this team until the quarterback is ready to be the guy. And that's why there should be no excuse to start anyone other than Kenny or CJ at quarterback next year. No excuse to start either one of those. Don't give me all their need experience. Bull crap. Go with the talented young guys. Ride that line. Ride those backs. Ride the vet. Jaden Greathouse is going to be going to his third year in the rotation in Notre Dame. Same with Jordan Faison. You know what I mean? You're going to have Cam Williams in year 2, Micah Gilbert in year 2, Logan Saldate. You got a good freshman class coming in. You can go to the portal and get a couple guys. There's a portal question about a receiver down there that I'm going to get to. That it would be a good one. So just keep doing what you're doing, build around those guys, and then let the quarterback develop over a 16-game season. Don't make silly decisions in August and September that are going to hurt your development when it matters most, which is in November.
Mailbag question from MT41. Joe Rudolph goes to the NFL. Your next year's O-line coach and Marcus Freeman tells you to put together an offensive line with the highest upside. What does that look like?
That is a great question. Because it's not just picking the 5 highest upside guys. It has to be the 5 highest upside guys at one of the 5 starting positions. So I can't say, okay, I'm going to have 5. I'm going to have Gerby Lambert, Charles Jagasaw, Sullivan Absher, Will Black, and picking Emil Wagner. Because you're like, well, okay, none of those guys are playing center. None of them. Right. And I'm not putting Billy Schrouth on the bench, even though just because Will Black, I might have higher upside than him or something. You know what I mean? Like it's who is the highest upside to be elite in 2025. If I had to, assuming that everyone is healthy, my upside offensive line for the 2025 season would probably be Charles Jagasaw at left tackle, Gerby Lambert at right tackle. Okay, we're just talking upside, so this isn't saying that Gerby should beat out Emil. It's just upside question, right? I would have Billy Schrouth at left guard. I would probably have Sullivan Absher at right guard. And I'd probably have either Ashton Craig or Anthony Knapp at center. I'd give Anthony Knapp a legitimate shot to beat out Ashton Craig and see if he could. And then the winner of that battle's my center. That would be my highest upside offensive line for next year. A realistic, not putting a true freshman in there and, that kind of thing, but highest upside offensive line. Because I'd like to say, maybe something with Emil Wagner, but I don't know that Emil can move inside. I don't know that he could play guard in that type of look. But that would be my line.
Yeah, I like that. With the highest upside, it's interesting because it's hard for me to not have Emil Wagner play, right? Like one of the tackle spots. I think when Jagasaw comes back, he has the highest upside at left tackle. I do on the team because I know there's been a lot of, complaints about Gerby Lambert not playing left tackle. Well, Anthony Knapp and Gerby Lambert were both true freshmen this year, and Anthony Knapp showed the coaching staff something that in camp he was just the most ready. And whether we agree with it or not,
he had all spring. That's what they said. He had all spring to, he worked there in the spring and all that. Yeah.
So I'm interested to see what would happen at the right tackle position with Emil Wagner and Gerby Lambert, because I don't think Emil Wagner is close to playing the best football that he's playing in South Bend. I think he's been steady, but I don't think he's at his ceiling. So I will, in the spirit of going away from what you said, I'm going to have the exact same offensive line center. It depends on if Ashton Craig is healthy or not. If it's Ashton Craig, it's Ashton Craig if he's healthy. But I would give Anthony Knapp a shot at center. And then right tackle, I'll put in Emil Wagner.
So what do you do with Gerby Lambert? Because he might have your highest upside on your entire offensive line. Put him at guard instead of Sullivan?
I'd probably put him at right guard.
But you and I could debate this. We could debate whether or not Will Black should be in the conversation as a true freshman. We could debate whether or not Sam Pendleton should be in this conversation. We could debate whether or not, there's guys in this conversation. That's the whole reason why I say your offensive line next year should be outstanding. And again, so we're clear, I'm answering a question about upside.
But yeah,
I'm not saying that Emil Wagner gets tossed aside next year. I'm not saying that he's going to have to compete for the job. The question was about upside. And I believe Gerby Lambert can match Emil Wagner's athleticism, but he's longer, a lot bigger, and stronger. And so, that's where he's at. I just got a text from my dad. My dad's listening to the show. He says, "What did BVG do to deserve being hired by Notre Dame?" I'm like, I don't have an answer for you.
Had a cool mustache.
Kiss Brian Kelly's behind. I mean, I don't know. That's about the. They were friends. I have no idea. I have no idea because he had he did some nice things at Georgia, but his defense at Auburn was, he was just, yeah.
It's a great question.
It was literally the worst defense in college football in Auburn history, I believe, is what I was told at one point in time that year. Around then, that was the worst defense Auburn ever had. 2012. It was. I'm actually going to go look this up because remember that was 2 years removed from winning the national championship, right? And they went 3-9 that year, and gave up 28.3 points per game. Yeah, that's not good. It's not good. He's terrible. I can't tell you. Sorry, Dad. I know I don't have. I like to think I have the answers a lot, but sometimes it's just such a stupid thing that I can't tell you what. I can't justify it. Can't justify it.
Super chat from Connor Grant. Thank you, Connor. In the playoffs, if Notre Dame were to face Oregon or Georgia, who would you feel more confident Notre Dame could beat and why?
Oh boy, that's a tougher one because my answer is probably Georgia. I'd feel more confident against Georgia this year because number one, Georgia, great run defense, or really good run defense, I should say, this season. But I think their secondary is very vulnerable, and I think they can be kind of got a little bit by a mobile quarterback, a little bit. I think Notre Dame can move the ball on Oregon, but here's the big difference. I have a lot more concern about playing the Oregon offense than I do the Georgia offense. The Georgia's offense this year is very mediocre, in my opinion. And they don't have the dynamic receivers that Evan Stewart's in a playoff game is going to be playing for dollars. I mean, and I don't mean that negatively, like he's a bad kid, but like when you're an elite player and you get into those, that's when the great talents step up and say, "Hey, I got a chance to prove myself here." It's not an insult to him. Like he doesn't care in other games. It's just those type of guys, when it's the lights are brightest, they a lot of times tend to be in that moment. And like that receiving core concerns me a whole lot more than what Georgia's does. And Georgia's got a good receiving core, don't get me wrong, but I think they can get pressure on the quarterback against Georgia more effectively. Carson Beck is kind of playing the way that we thought he was going to play. He's coming back down to reality of who he is as a talent, and doesn't have Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey and a soft schedule to throw to, and then to throw against. They have to actually play real defenses this year, unlike last year. I think Notre Dame would eat that defense. It would eat that offensive line up. I do. I know Georgia's got a great D-line and all that. That's fine. But Georgia's got to score. And I think that Notre Dame has a better chance of keeping that score in their favor against Georgia with that offense. Because even in the Texas game, the Georgia offense still didn't play very well in that game. Georgia offense was mediocre in that game. The difference between Notre Dame and Texas is Notre Dame has a quarterback that can still make plays in those situations when they're getting pressured, where Quinn Ewers is just going to get hit. That's the difference.
This one's tough for me because I think there's arguments on both sides that you could make. Because
there's no doubt. I agree with that, Trevor, for sure.
From a physicality standpoint, I just don't know how Notre Dame is matching up against Georgia. I mean, outside of their offense not looking great, Georgia went in and bullied Texas at home.
That's a bit of an anomaly for them this year, though. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, they haven't been that team most of the year. I mean, right?
Yeah, I mean they handled Clemson pretty well. They handled Texas pretty well.
If Cade Klubnik wasn't trash in that game, that's a complete look. I'll let you finish. You let me finish. I'll let you finish.
No, I hear you.
We're going to be good debaters today.
I hear you. I just I don't know what I want to take. I agree with you that in Evan Stewart, this would be a money game for him if they were to play. But regardless, dude, that Oregon speed is different. And Notre Dame is a much faster team this year. But they also haven't gone up against teams that have the kind of speed that Oregon has. Ohio State learned that the hard way. So there's things that you can draw to
and
both
no Benjamin
teams.
Morrison.
I know. So it's just I don't know who I would want to match up over, because yes, Notre Dame is a very fast team, but like they haven't been tested with an Oregon level speed. Georgia's a physical team, albeit it is a little bit up and down, but on Notre Dame's schedule, they haven't faced a team that can be as physically dominant as Georgia. I just don't believe so. So
I don't know. Look, I think Texas A&M, from a physicality standpoint, was a pretty physical football team in that game against Notre Dame. It's not like they haven't seen anything close to what Georgia can do.
Sure.
I'll somewhat push back on that. And yes, their D-line is very good, but you said something. One of those games, Notre Dame has the speed advantage in across the board. The other one that they don't necessarily have the speed advantage in. That's my concern. That's my concern. And I'm a whole lot more concerned about defending Will Stein's offense than I am Mike Bobo's offense. You know what I mean? Like that's a big difference for me. You know what I mean? So they would both be great games in my 100%. Opinion.
Yeah.
Because
absolutely.
in a pushback, one of the pushbacks I would have given to myself, Trevor, is but what's the difference between Georgia against Kentucky and Georgia against Auburn and Georgia against Mississippi State and then Georgia against Texas? One of those was a spotlight game that they're going to get up for. Okay, fair. And they would most likely be up for a Notre Dame playoff game. Fair. Right, very fair. You're more likely to get the Texas version of what we saw from their front seven than the Kentucky version of what they did in the front seven, or the Auburn, Mississippi State. That'd be fair. So yeah, we'll see. I just felt like the Clemson game, I felt like was a bit of a it was one of those games where you look at the outcome and you're like, that game was not a 34-3 game. It reminded me a lot of what Clemson did to Notre Dame in 2018. You're like, second half, they kind of ran away with it because their offense couldn't do anything, and they missed a bunch of pass game opportunities in the first half. That was a much more competitive game than the final score looked. And I said this after that game. That secondary at Georgia is going to be a problem for them all year. Because I'm watching Adam Randall and the other receivers just getting open all game long, and Cade Klubnik could not get them the football. Not because he was getting pressured all the time. That happened at times, but they could not cover. They still can't cover. So that's the thing for me that's going to be Georgia's kryptonite unless they start playing better. And that's what we're going to find out. We're going to know if Georgia's secondary is improved over the next 3 weeks. Somewhat against Florida and DJ Lagway, but more so I'm looking at the Tennessee and the Ole Miss games. Is more so what I'm looking at to see if that secondary is improved. Because if it's improved, then they'll handle themselves better in those games. If it hasn't been, then they're gonna struggle. And I'm also very curious to see how Georgia does up front on their D line against Tennessee's offensive line. To kind of tell us, was the Texas game okay? That's who they are in big moments, or was it just sort of a one-off where Texas wasn't tested and they couldn't handle? Georgia was much better tested.
Sure.
So there's going to be some games that show us a lot of this stuff. Somebody made a great point in the Bice Hold yesterday, or was it on the message board? I forget what it was. But somebody said the Florida State game is actually going to be a great test for Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner to see if they've actually improved. Because even though Florida State as a team sucks, they still have really athletic and long athletic edge rushers. And I'm like, that's a very fair point, right? So if they are improved, then they will handle those guys. If they're not, then they're going to have some issues against those guys. Doesn't mean Notre Dame's going to lose or it's going to be close, but that particular matchup is going to be telling, even though the rest of the game is a mismatch. That matchup is going to tell us a lot about it. So that's a very fair point. And so that's going to be an intriguing part of what we see from this Georgia team the next 3 weeks is their defensive line going to actually play with any kind of consistency, or is it going to be like this up and down affair all year? And that's what we're going to find out. Because I think with Georgia, a lot of people are still living on what Georgia was a couple years ago. And they're still assuming that Georgia is this thing that they're not. Their D-line is very good. It's not what it was in 2021 and 2022. It's just not. Right? And so it doesn't mean they're not talented. Doesn't mean they're not a top 5, top 10 offensive defensive line. Just they're not that. But the biggest difference is they don't have the second and third level speed that they've had in past years. They just don't.
Yeah.
And that's been true all season. Maybe they're banged up or this. I get all that, but that's just I'm basing off the players they're putting on the field this season. And that's why Oregon concerns me a little bit. They're both going to be really tough games, and Notre Dame could lose to both of them. But if you're asking me which one's the better matchup for Notre Dame, I still think it's Georgia. Because they can take advantage of the speed and the tempo. They can go we've seen them do it against teams that are kind of bigger. Just go speed up the tempo. Right? Get moving. Don't let them do all that pre-snap nonsense that they do. Get their defensive backs isolated. Do 7 and 8 man pass pros and get some shots down the field. Get Jeremiah Love out in space on their linebackers. Like all that stuff is what we need to see. And then of course the offensive line has to continue playing better. Because that's the other thing too is I'm projecting a little bit on the Notre Dame offensive line getting better this last month and building on what we saw against Navy. Because that changes things a little bit too.
Sure. Yeah, no, for sure. The interesting thing about this matchup, regardless, is you kind of look at, will Notre Dame be physical enough to play Georgia, or will they be fast enough to play Oregon? Either way, it's going to be finding out a lot about either team, which I think would be a really interesting conversation. Because, yeah, I mean, it's just there's so much you could go back and forth on. Like I said at the start, man, I'll hear arguments out for both sides because I think they would both be valid. On the Oregon side, it's they might not be as big as physical as Georgia. It's like, I mean, yeah, sure, but they would be going up against Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart without Ben Morrison and a true freshman at corner, right. But then same thing for Georgia. It's just, Notre Dame had a test week 1 against a very physical Texas A&M team, but who knows what, will Notre Dame be able to rise up to that physicality where their offensive line be able to hold? That's a good question, Connor. That's a good submission.
It's not like we're debating who would you rather face, Georgia or Kentucky.
Right.
I mean, these are 2 top 5 teams now. You know what I mean?
2,
like that's the debate.
Yeah.
Well, that's where they're ranked. I don't think that Georgia's the second best team in college football. That's been my whole point all year. Is they're not. They are there because of what the perception of who Georgia is. But if I'm wrong, we're going to find out over the next month. Because if I'm wrong, they're not going to run the table the rest of the way. If I'm right, they're not going to run the table the rest of the way. If I'm wrong, they might. But I also think some of these SEC teams were a little overhyped coming into the season. Ole Miss being a top 10 team. We said before the year, Trevor, what we say? Let's see if Lane Kiffin can actually put back-to-back good seasons together. Let's see if he can do that or not. Right? Ole Miss has not been what people thought they would be this season. I mean, there's all this hype about this team and the SEC, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but let's just see how this next month plays out. It's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, you and I talked about Ole Miss yesterday. They did what they did since Lane Kiffin got to town. They played non-SEC teams and hung 60, 50, 70, and then they started playing SEC teams and they haven't put up over 30.
They're good. They're good when no one expects them to be good, and they're disappointing when everybody expects them to be good.
Yeah.
That's been and that's true of him. Was true of him at Florida Atlantic as well. He couldn't put back-to-back seasons together at Florida Atlantic as well, or at USC.
Another super chat from Zach Nichols. Thank you, Zach. A Notre Dame beat writer said 2025 is a transition year. This seems absurd to me. Me too. There's a lot to play for this year, but buy, sell, hold. 2025 is a transition.
I mean, I'm selling that. Like, so what that? Just so you guys know, that's the spin that's going to come out of Notre Dame this entire offseason, in my opinion. Because I believe that they're looking at this team being super young next year, and the schedule is going to be very challenging. And so what I believe it to be is to set the bar low, and then if you can get the young players to play to their potential, then you play past that bar, is what I think is happening. Transition year. What does transition year mean? Like, okay, they're going to be good, but not great. But 26 is the year. No, I'm not going to go into that. I'm so tired of that. I hated that crap during the Brian Kelly era. It was always wait till next year, and then we're going to get to 26 and they're going to have some departure. Something's going to happen. And then it's like, yeah, but 27's really the year. No, your first full recruiting class are going to be juniors. Your second recruiting class, which is an elite recruiting class, is going to be sophomores, and a bunch of those dudes are going to have played. So, no, I'm not getting into the whole, well, they got to do this. No. Look, am I expecting them to go 12-0 next year? I don't really expect them to ever go 12-0. My expectation is get to the postseason with a chance to play for the national championship. I would say that I think there could be a transition at the beginning of the season. There will be a transition period early in the season where you might catch a loss, maybe two, but by the time you get to October, November, you should be that team that everybody's like, they're a playoff team. They are dominant. They're blowing people out. That is a team you do not want to play in the playoff. If they mean transition by that, then I can accept that, because they're going to have a most likely have a very young, inexperienced quarterback. The offensive line will look different than it will when the season ends, because you're having guys coming back from injury. You are going to have to replace some very talented, an All-American at safety, a 6-year senior captain at linebacker, 2 studs at defensive tackle. I get all that. But you're going into year 4 of the Marcus Freeman tenure, which means your first unofficial recruiting class, which you recruited fully as the defensive coordinator, are now going to be seniors. Your first real full recruiting class where you impacted both sides are going to be juniors. So your junior and senior class have had a big impact on you bringing them in. And with all this NIL money that Notre Dame keeps talking about, the couple holes that you have, you should be able to fill in the portal. You should. You should be able to go out and get a really good defensive tackle in the portal. Like, that's just no excuse for not to. So, I'm sorry. I'm not buying the transition year. I will say I could see Notre Dame in September not looking like a championship team yet. They'll have some flashes. But by the time we get to October and November, this team better be playing like a championship team, in my opinion. They should. And then we go into 2026 talking about, boy, this team could be special. So if they mean transition year by that, sure. I could somewhat understand that, Trevor. Like 10-2, fighting for a playoff berth in November because you're dominant. That's the floor for me when you talk about the talent this football team has. Now, there's always an asterisk. What if they have to overhaul the coaching staff because a bunch of guys get head coaching jobs? Okay, we can cross that bridge when we get there, but that's not where we are right now. You know what I mean? But right now, when I look at they're going to have one of the best backfields in college football next year. They're going to have one of the best linebacking cores in college football next year. Even if Benjamin Morrison doesn't come back, they're going to have one of the best cornerback tandems in college football next year. They're going to have a very talented defensive end group next year. You got to figure some stuff out in the D tackle. Your offensive line, we don't know what it's going to look like, but you know what it is going to be? Freaking big and experienced and talented. And you're always going to be good at tight end. And now you're in a position where Jaden Greathouse is a junior, Jordan Faison's a junior, KK Smith is a junior, Cam Williams is a sophomore, Micah Gilbert's a sophomore. Go out and get me one portal guy at wide receiver, and you should be really good there. So no, I don't want to kind of get into a lot of the talk about, well, this is a transition year, so like 9-3, 8-4 is going to be okay. No, I'm not buying that. There might be a transition month early in the season that I could live with, but by the end of the year, you better be really flipping good. So that's where I'm at, Trevor. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, if the goal is to become an elite college football program, I read transition year as rebuilding year. And I think that's a bunch of BS. Well, like, look at the dominant teams that have came up in college football over the last decade and a half, right? Alabama, when Nick Saban was there in his prime, never used the excuse of, we were really good this year, but, we're losing some guys. I don't talk about coaching turnover. I mean, Alabama lost coaches because people were fighting to get them. They lost coordinators. They lost players to the draft. And every single year, they were in contention for the playoffs. I mean, same thing with Georgia in that time that they kind of went on their little run. Same thing with Clemson when they went on theirs. Like, it's just good programs find a way to reload, and you do that through good recruiting, building a great team culture. And I don't buy into the transition years, because then that is basically saying that there's just some recruiting classes that you just don't believe in, and you're waiting for the next recruiting class, which is a lot of the issues that I had with Brian Kelly. Look at how great our recruiting class is, but then it's easy to spin the narrative and say, well, we're just not ready yet, so don't expect anything great from us. Like, I firmly believe that Notre Dame is kind of past that time of, all right, here we go, 10-3, 12-win season with a bowl win, 8-4. And then you start building it back up. Like, I don't think it's just going to be this constant 3-year cycle. I don't. So, like, just with what Marcus Freeman is building. So, yes, I can agree to some extent. Like, will it be a transition year in the sense that Notre Dame will transition from being a good team to a great team in 2025? Sure. But I mean, like we've talked about throughout the week, there's very few teams over the last, the 14 college football playoff that started week 1 as the most dominant team and ended the year the most dominant team. There's very few cases of that in that time span. So yes, could it be that type of transition for Notre Dame? Sure. But I mean, you've made the argument that most championship teams do that, right? So as far as a rebuilding year, no, that's a sell. That's a hard sell. When you're at a program like Notre Dame, you can't have those. Like, when you are, when you're a Notre Dame, when you're in Alabama, when you're in Ohio State, when you're in Georgia, like, insert the top teams that people reference year over year, right? You can't have those. Well, I mean, they could be good, but we're not expecting much because they lost a 6-year linebacker. It's just going to be it's a cycle that Notre Dame should get out of, and they're showing the signs that they are. So, I mean, Notre Dame was supposed to have another rebuilding year this year because they lost Joe Alt and they lost Cam Hart and they lost Blake Fisher, and they had to go and get another transfer portal quarterback. And well, now they're on pace to have a better record than they did last year. So That's how I look at it, Brian.
We're on the same page. Good question. Some really good questions today from you guys. Really good stuff. All right, let's get back up here to this is a follow-up to MT41's earlier question about the offensive line.
All righty. Any chance next year's offensive line can look like this left to right? Lambert at left tackle, Jagasaw at left guard, Ashton Craig at center, Billy Schroth at right guard, Emil Wagner at right tackle.
I would be doubtful because of just so far they've been really reluctant to give Billy Shroud or Emil. I'm going to get the name there eventually. Gerby Lambert a shot at left tackle so far. Didn't mean to make you spit your water on yourself, Trevor. Sorry.
That's funny.
But I would be totally fine with this. Totally fine with this. And if you wanted to put Knapp in at center over Craig, if he's not healthy back yet, that's fine too. But I'd be totally fine with that starting offensive line.
Yeah,
Totally fine.
I'd be fine with it. I'm in the same light as you. I find it hard to believe that Gerby Lambert is going to go from not taking reps away in practice from Anthony Knapp to taking reps away,
taking
from
the spot
Charles
away.
Jagasaw.
Right.
You know, now I could see a situation where they just come right off the bat and say, Charles Jagasaw, we're moving you to guard. You know, and that happens in spring, and then Gerby Lambert kind of gets shot 2.0 to take that left tackle spot. Who knows? But it's just right now, state of the state, it's hard for me to believe that Gerby Lambert is going to take reps away from the returning starting left tackle in Anthony Knapp and returning projected starter from the start of this year in Charles Jagasaw. So I will say, I mean, if that's a starting offensive line next year and your smallest guy is Emil Wagner, it's 6'6", 296. It's a big O-line, man. That's a big offensive line. Oof.
So, Trev, I have the stats for Julius Peppers in 2001.
Let's go.
So, in 2001, Julius Peppers had 63 tackles, 19 tackles for loss, 9.5 sacks, 3 interceptions, 9 pass breakups, and a forced fumble. One of those interceptions he took back for a touchdown. So, like, if any of y'all remember that 2001 season, dude was a monster for North Carolina. And I remember the part of the reason I watched those teams is because they had guys I played against in high school on that team. But they also had Ronald Curry on that team, and I remember watching Ronald Curry. And Dre Bly, I think, had just left North Carolina. I played against him as well in high school. But yeah, that team was really, really talented, really talented. But I still say if Ronald Curry would have gone to Virginia or Michigan or Florida State, who just played basketball, unbelievable. But yeah, Julius Peppers was a phenomenal college football player.
Sounds like it.
Yep.
Aiden Benami, has Mr. Emil Wagner been our most consistent lineman so far? Under the radar every game.
No, not even close. Mr. Emil Wagner is a poster on the message board. You're talking about Emil Wagner? Sorry, I had to do it to you. I would say so. He's had some. I mean, all of the alignment had a little bit of an up and down season, right? And Emil's stretch has been recently. You know, like he wasn't great against Georgia Tech. It's probably his worst game of the year. He was okay against Stanford, but had some moments. But his downs have been, you know, not as down as some of the other downs. He hasn't got hurt. He's the only guy that hasn't got hurt amongst the older players. But I'd say he's been their most consistent lineman so far. And honestly, as a right tackle, you want to be under the radar. When you're an offensive tackle and nobody's talking about you, that's a good thing. Means, right? Because usually when people only talk about offensive linemen, if they have like insanely ridiculous like blocks, like that one knockout block Quentin Nelson had against Georgia, remember that linebacker blitz, and or you're getting beat. I mean, when's the last time they showed a Notre Dame game in 23 or 22 where they're like, watch this great block by Joe Alt? Nope. Never showed that. It was never on the highlight reel. So, yeah, it's a good thing. But no, he's been very steady this year. I mean, of all the linemen, he's definitely been their most steady so far.
Yeah, I agree. Kyle Wade asked, which group of 5 game are you most looking forward to this weekend?
It's a good question. Let me pull up that schedule here real quick and go through it. Don't care as much about. There was one game that I saw that would somewhat impact Navy. Nice win for Tulane last night, by the way. Army Air Force, no. You find it. Boy, I wish that Memphis UTS game had a little bit more on the line. UTSA is taking a big drop off this season. Let's see here. Give me a second. Navy at Rice, no. Looks like that game might be next weekend. There was a game I saw this week that I thought I saw for this weekend at the group of 5 level that was going to be like kind of an important game, but I think that might be next weekend. So of the games here, Toledo, Eastern Michigan will be interesting. 2 5-3 teams, both 2-2 in the MAC. Chris Creighton's trying to get a much needed win. That might be a decent group of 5 game. So I guess right now the 2 I care most about would be the Army Air Force game because Notre Dame needs Army to win, and then the Navy Rice game because Notre Dame needs Rice to win. Hey, did you see that Liberty lost again on Wednesday night? Got beat by Jacksonville State. That was the game that I was looking at actually. The Wednesday night game between Liberty. They lost to Jacksonville State. Rich Rod needed that because Jack State got off to a really bad start this season. They started 0-3. They got blown out by Coastal Carolina, got blown out by Louisville, and then lost it. I think it was an overtime to Eastern Michigan. I think Vince's kid was at that game actually on a visit. And then since then, they've won 5 in a row. They beat Southern Miss by 37. They beat Kennesaw State by 39. They beat New Mexico State by 41. They beat Middle Tennessee by 22. And then last night they went to Liberty and beat Liberty by 10. So Rich Rod's squad is balling recently. So after that rough start, because I kind of stopped paying attention to Jacksonville State after they started 0-3. Because they're pretty good last year. They were a fun team to watch last year. I was like, Rich Rod's lost the team. And I was like looking at it this week, and I was like, they're 4-3. Because I was like, how's Liberty going to bounce back from Kennesaw? Who do they got this weekend? And I saw they had that Wednesday night game against Jacksonville. Jacksonville State's 4-3. Seriously? Like I thought they hadn't won a game yet. You know what I mean? Because I just kind of stopped paying attention after they lost, to Eastern Michigan. And I was like, holy moly! Not only have they not lost since that Eastern Michigan game, they haven't played a close game since then. So that was the big one. But I'd say probably Navy at Rice is a big one because Rice just fired their coach. How does Navy bounce back from that loss to Notre Dame? Notre Dame needs them to go on the road and smash Rice this weekend. And people be like, hey, listen, Navy's still as good as you thought they were. Just Notre Dame's Notre Dame, right? So that's probably the one I'm most intrigued by.
Yeah, mine's the Army Air Force game. I know Air Force isn't anything to write home about this year, but it's always, battle between the service academies is always more competitive than what people think it's going to be. And with Notre Dame having yet to play Army, get a little pre-scouting in. I mean, spoiler alert, Bryson Daly's absolutely nasty on the football field. But yeah, I'm not going to learn anything new from that standpoint.
I hate the triple option, and I like watching that kid play.
Man,
he's really good. He's really good.
Nuts.
Yeah.
Absolutely nuts. He's had 9 rushing touchdowns and 2 passing touchdowns in his last 2 games.
Yep.
That's just insane.
Yep. Agree. He's really good.
Goodness. All
right, here we go.
Aiden Benami, going into our home stretch, who's been the most surprising player so far? Good surprising. Just one. This summer I thought it would be Adon. Might have gotten that one right.
Yeah, I mean, if you were surprised, I'm not surprised by Adon, so I can't count Adon. But if you were, that's a good one. He's been very good so far. If you're going to go with a positive surprise, none at linebacker, none in the secondary. I mean, Leonard Moore's probably been a little bit better than I thought he was going to be right away. But I gave the guy a 4.5-star upside grade, so I shouldn't be shocked that a 6'2" fast cornerback that I thought had top 50 national player talent is good as a freshman. None of the receivers are a pleasant surprise. Backs, no. You know what? Somebody in the chat said it, and I was trying to think of somebody else because I didn't want to go with something that I had read from that somebody else said. But I really think, that a guy that I would look at and say might be the most pleasant surprise for me so far, and Raymond Harton said it in the chat. Ray, hope you're feeling better today, and got good news from the doctor yesterday, by the way. But I'd say Raymond Harton said Pat Coogan. Pat Coogan's been real steady, like real steady as a center. And he's really solidified that line. Like, and not that he's playing great, and there's still things he's got to improve upon, but he's just like there's been some snaps here and there where he gets beat, but there's never been a game where it's like last year against Louisville or last year against Duke or, where you're just like, this guy's a liability. You cannot have him on the field right now. He hasn't had that game. And the fact that he was so locked into his role as the backup center after being a 13-game starter last year, he was ready to just step right into the lineup and be okay, says a lot about the kid. Now, forget the football part of it. It says a lot about that kid and where his head is. And same with Rocco. I mean, those two kids, neither one of them were happy being backups. But those two kids keeping their heads on straight and putting in the work every single day in practice to be ready if their number was called, saved this season. Honestly. Because they lose to Louisville if those two kids didn't have their heads right and they just would have got dominated for 4 quarters against Louisville like they did last year by Louisville, they lose that football game. Those two kids and how they've – and I guess they're, those two young men and how they've responded to the adversity that they've gone through this year, losing their jobs in a way that I don't think either of them probably thinks was fair. And I explained last week or earlier this week why I think the process was flawed and disadvantaged to the veterans. Says a lot about them as young men, which is more important to me than what they are as football players. But it's benefited them as football players, and that has helped the team. If those two guys were in their feelings about getting beat out and were pouting like a lot of college football players do nowadays when they get beat out, this team is not sitting here at 7-1 and ranked in the top 10. They would not have beat Louisville if those two kids did not mentally stay locked in, even though they weren't happy with where they were. I truly believe that. I truly, because if they were not locked in, that Louisville game would have gone a whole different way if those two kids didn't put in the work and didn't have the right mindset. Because you can't just flip that switch back. Oh, shoot, I'm playing now. I got to act like I care. Wouldn't have happened. Or they, I don't know, might have quit the team like somebody else did when they weren't happy to play a time.
Fair enough. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough, Brian. Do you know how hard it is as a veteran on the team, as a returning starter from last season, to have your role go from being the guy to now I just have to be ready whenever they call my name and number? Do you know how hard that is mentally? That'd be hard mentally for me, and I'm 27, right? Let alone when you're putting yourself in the shoes of a 20, 21-year-old, right? I mean, that is so impressive because they so easily could have been like, oh, now you need us.
All right.
Now you need us. And they didn't. I mean, hats off to them. So Coogan is up there for me. And honestly, I'm kind of with you, Iden. It's not that I thought that Adon wasn't going to be good. I thought he was going to be good. But he's kind of one of the, I thought whoever lined up at safety, whether it was going to be Adon Schuler or Luke Tallick, or if Rod Hurd got the start since he was a transfer and had a lot of experience, I thought that whoever lined up next to Xavier Watts was just going to kind of live in his shadow. And that is not the case for Adon Schuler, honestly. Now, I'm not saying he is playing as good as Xavier Watts, but Adon Schuler is playing so well that it's not only is like, yep, they got Xavier Watts and they have another athletic kid. When teams are preparing for Notre Dame, it's very much like they have 2 safeties that you cannot sleep on. They have 2 guys back there. So the most surprising player is Adon, and I'm not surprised that he's playing well. I'm surprised that he is now he put me in a position to where, yes, we're losing Xavier Watts next year, and now Adon Schuler's here, right? So it's just kind of that reload cycle that I'm talking about. So I'm with the Iden, but if I'm not going with Adon, definitely Pat Coogan, because not only did he lose out on a starting position, he came back in at a different position than what he played last year and is being effective. That's something to be noted. Definitely something to be noted, man.
Yep.
Kyle Wade asks, how legit do you think Pitt is on a scale of Kennesaw State to Georgia? Oh, gosh.
I think what we've seen from Pitt this year, I can confidently say that they're a top 40 football team. And look, are they the 18th best team in the country? We'll have a better sense of that Saturday night, right? I mean, we'll have a better sense of that. They go on the road and beat SMU on the road. Okay, you know what? They're legit top 25 football team. But I can confidently say that they're a top 40 team easily right now. I mean, look, they haven't played anybody. I get that. But your job is to beat the teams in front of you. You can't control who you play. Once you get to the season, you can't control who you play. You can only control how you play against the teams in front of you. And guess what? Pitt, a team that went 3-9 last year. A team that went 3-9 last year. And let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of their 9 losses were by double digits. The games that weren't losses by double digits was a home loss to a Cincinnati team that went 3-9 and a road loss to a Wake Forest team that went 4-8. Those are the only 2 losses they had where they did not beat the team by double digits. They had that ridiculous win over Louisville, I still don't understand, but they got beat by North Carolina, beat them by 17. Virginia Tech beat them by 17. Notre Dame beat them by 51. Florida State beat them by 17. Syracuse beat them by 15, a team that had fired their coach. And then Duke beat them by 11. So they were bad last year. And he went out and hired some guy I'd never heard of, an FCS offensive coordinator from Western Carolina. And because he said, hey, we got to change how we're attacking teams. And that guy's done a great job with that team this year. Now, last couple games, teams have kind of getting a sense of, okay, here's what they're doing schematically. They've defended them a little bit better. Cal kept the points down. But you know what, man? They're going out there and they're doing what they need to do. And they had a great comeback win over Cincinnati this year. They beat a mediocre West Virginia team, but they just kind of kept getting better. Blowout win over Kent State, blowout win over Youngstown State, beat North Carolina convincingly, did what they needed to do against Cal. Syracuse, it's like you don't really know how that game would have played out. I mean, you had 3 interceptions in the first quarter. 2 of them, I think, were returned for or 3 pick sixes in the first quarter. Like, first half, I mean, like, okay, you don't really know how they would have played, but you know what? Syracuse wasn't ready for that moment. Pitt was. I don't know what else you want me to tell you about that. You know what I mean? So they have certainly earned my respect this year, and I don't say that, you know, lightly, because I don't have a lot of respect for Pat Narduzzi in a lot of different ways. But dude, that team could have quit this offseason. He could have lost the entire team. Some guys, he got rid of some guys, and some guys left for money, and they've altered how. There's a really nice article written about that, how they've kind of altered their NIL strategy to get, you know, be more bought into the team, and they're responding great. I mean, if Pat Narduzzi wasn't their head coach, I'd be rooting for Pitt to win all their games because it'd be a great story, you know. But they're a top 40 team, Trevor. And if they win this weekend, then I'll say they're a legit top 25 team. I just need to see how they play against SMU this weekend before I can really say for sure that I buy. And when I mean top 25, they deserve to be ranked in the top 25 right now. But it doesn't mean I think they are a top 25 team. You get what I'm saying? So I'm talking about like where I would rank the quality of the teams as opposed to their actual ranking. Like, I think Notre Dame is one of the 5 to 6 best teams in college football right now. I don't think Notre Dame deserves to be ranked in the top 5. Does that make sense? Or you know what I mean? So, like, that's what I mean is their ranking is justified because they've won all their games, but I don't know that I believe that they are one of the 25 best teams in the country. And I think when the season plays out, it'll show itself that way. But they can change my mind this weekend when they play against SMU, at SMU.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad you phrased it that way, because I've been trying to think of a way to put that into words for the last couple of weeks, because I have a lot of friends that are talking to me about the rankings and who's doing this. Like, does Iowa State deserve to be ranked in the top 25? I believe so. Do I think I could list off 25 teams that I think that could beat Iowa State? I also think so. So I'm glad that you phrase it as they deserve to be ranked in the top 25, but I don't know if they are a top 25 team as far as one of the top 25 teams in college football. So I'm the same with you when it comes to Pitt. I think that they have done well with the schedule that they have played, but this weekend's going to be a big test for them. So if they play SMU convincingly, if they win, obviously, I think they're up there. But I think they're a top 40 team right now. If they lose in a close one, I think they're still a top 40 team, somewhere in the, you know, low 40s, high 30s range. If they beat SMU, yeah, top 25 team.
Yeah, because Trev, if they lose in a close game against SMU, then they prove that, hey, you're a top 40 team. You know, maybe top 35 team.
Yeah.
But if you win that game, then obviously you're a legit and top 25 team, not ranking wise, but just if I'm ranking, you know, how good I think certain teams are, because the rankings can be, hey, listen, you deserve to, like, Iowa State deserves to be ranked in the top 20 right now because they've won all their games.
Right.
But I think that there's a lot of teams. There's more than 20 teams that would have an undefeated record if they would have played Iowa State's schedule. so far. They just would. There wouldn't be as many teams undefeated if they had to play BYU's schedule, which is why I look at BYU and hold them in higher regard than I do Iowa State. So that's kind of where I'm at. So yeah, we'll find out this weekend. But I'd say, are they legit as in the 18th best team in the country? I don't think so right now, but they can prove us that they are this weekend against SMU. And I even think if Pitt's ranked 18th right now, if Pitt goes on the road and it is a 4-quarter dogfight that SMU wins late, then I'd say keep Pitt in the top 25. They absolutely deserve to be in the top 25. They went on the road against another top 25 team and played a 4-quarter game where it's back and forth and all that, and they've proven that they're a top 25 team. Drop them below 18, but keep them in the top 25. And then they can go prove themselves against Clemson and Louisville and, BC in future games if they deserve to stay there. It's a good question, Kyle.
BK's last brain cell going into next season using only potential returning players and incoming commits. Who are your starters on both sides of the ball?
All right. CJ or Kenny at quarterback, Jeremiah Love at running back with a rotation of Jadarian Price, Aeneas, and Keidron Williams. My tight end is rotation. It's not one guy. It's two guys that are going to play a bunch between Cooper Flanagan and Eli Raridan. Don't be shocked if James Flanagan is working his way into the field in some capacity as a true freshman. He's a dude. Receiver of the guys they have now, my 3-man starting lineup would probably be KK Smith, Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, and either Cam Williams or Micah Gilbert, with KK Smith working in a ton at both outside spots. That my offensive line is Jagasaw, Schrouth, Craig, Absher, either Wagner or Lambert. Maybe they kick Lambert inside. If Emil's that good this offseason, maybe you kick Lambert inside and let him play a little bit of right guard until, he takes over at right tackle down the road. D-line would be, if Boubacar's healthy, be Boubacar and Burnham as my 2 starters, with Bryce Young and Junior Tilamaka playing a bunch, Logan Thomas playing a bunch also off the bench. Gabriel Rubio and Donovan Heinisch would be my 2 starting tackles, with Armo Mukum and hopefully somebody like a Brennan Vernon or a Devin Houston fighting to get into that mix. Sean Sevillano working in the mix there as a rotation nose tackle. My linebacking core would be Drake Bowen and Kingston would be my starters, with Jaden Alsbury being my number 1 backup at all 3 linebacker spots, and would he be my starting rover at certain situations. My starting corners, assuming Benjamin Morrison goes pro, would be Christian Gray and Leonard Moore. If Benjamin comes back, I would probably have one of those 3 guys. I'd probably move to nickel and start him there. And then my starting safety tandem, I'm going to go with a little bit of a surprise here. I'm going to go with Don Schuler as 1 starting safety, and Jadon Blair is my other starting safety. Every year, 1 freshman kind of steps up and is that guy. And next year, I think it's going to be Jadon Blair. It'll either be him, hopefully like a Bronte Johnson has a great offseason, something like that. That would be and then I'd have Carson Hobbs as sort of my do-it-all guy at corner. I could play boundary, field, nickel. He'd be in that mix as well. That would be and then I would also give Dallas Golden a shot to be the nickel if Benjamin is gone, because then you need to kind of have Carson in the mix a little bit more outside. So that would be my starting lineup next year.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I'll go CJ Carr starting quarterback, Jeremiah Love starting running back, rotating in. I mean, the rotation's going to be massive, especially if Jabron Payne's healthy. He's a guy that I forgot about that's still there. But running back rotation is the same that you listed. I'm going to go Jaden Greathouse and Micah Gilbert on the outside. I'll have Jordan Faison in the slot, rotating the tight ends. Offensive line, I'm going to go left to right, Charles Jagasaw, Billy Schrouth, Ashton Craig if he's healthy. Right guard, I'll go Sullivan Absher. Right tackle, I'm going to go Emil Wagner for now. And then D-line on the edges, I'm going to go D-line on the edges, I'm going to go, I think, Bryce Young and Josh Burnham. Defensive tackle, I'll go Donnie Heinisch and Gabe Rubio. Linebackers, I have the same as you. Corners, I'd have Leonard Moore in the nickel for how well he tackles in the open field, and I think he's really good in run support with tackling. And then
I'm going to comes back. If Benjamin comes back,
okay. Yeah, with the wording being potential returning players, I'm just going to put Benjamin Morrison starting at the boundary, and then Christian Gray starting to the field, and then safeties I like.
Stupid good.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? My God.
I know. With the Don Schuler and Jadon Blair starting at safety, with Luke Talich and Bronte Johnson rotating in pretty routinely.
Don't count out Kennedy Urlacher either. I left him out of that conversation as well.
Yep. That's
transition year might be behind.
That's what I'm saying. That's
no from the portal.
That's what I'm saying.
From the portal.
Oh my goodness, man. That's
transition year my butt. Oh my.
Yeah. Muhammad Abdi, Brian, do you think it would be beneficial for Notre Dame to schedule a Big 12 team every year to help in Texas recruiting like in the past? I know playing Texas A&M this year didn't hurt.
Yeah, that's something we've talked about this in the past, Trev. That's a topic that you and I will have some fun with this offseason in the shows. We'll do sort of like what's the ideal Notre Dame schedule, and not specifically like here's the 12 teams they should play every year, but like here's a slot where they should play a Big 12 team or play a game in Dallas. So like, hey, we're going to schedule Arizona or Arizona State or Iowa State, but Iowa State, the deal is we're playing in Arlington or playing at the Cotton Bowl. You know what I mean? Or, you know what I mean? We're playing in Houston, at Reliant State. Isn't Reliant Stadium? Is that where the Texans play, right? In Houston? Isn't it Reliant Stadium? We're playing in the Alamo Dome, something like that. You know what I mean? Like it would have to be, you either play a Texas team or you play a game in Texas. And like, I'd be fine doing a home and home with TCU, do a home and home with Baylor, do a home, you know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't necessarily want to do a home and home with Texas Tech because I don't necessarily want to go to Lubbock, Texas, but like play them in Dallas, play Arkansas in Dallas, like Texas A&M does, something like that. You know what I mean? But like you'd have to be careful with the Big 12 team that you play because, playing Iowa State doesn't help you in Texas. Playing Kansas and Kansas State doesn't help you in Texas. And I think that's the point that Muhammad's getting at is not so much a Big 12 team, but there's all those Texas teams in the Big 12. Here'd be a great one that I would love to see Notre Dame do. I wish Notre Dame played BYU more. I do. I mean, you're two like-minded institutions in that. Not obviously, there's a big difference between Catholicism and Mormonism, like the huge difference. But the point is, you're two religiously oriented institutions that believe in people conducting themselves a certain way, and you hold yourselves to a certain standard. Every 10 years, I wish Notre Dame and BYU play each other 4 times. Right? Give me a home and home, and then 2 neutral site games. That's what I'd like to see, and then play that game 1 year in Dallas. BYU would probably like to get down to Dallas a little bit for recruiting. You think so? That's kind of where I'm at, Trevor. I think getting some games down there would make a lot of sense, and I think playing in Oklahoma or Texas, both, because Oklahoma's right there. I mean, they borders Texas. Those games would be huge. So playing, and it's not just always playing in Texas, but then playing some of those Texas teams at home as well. I mean, hey, you're looking at Baylor or TCU or Texas or something like that. Like Notre Dame and Texas should have a home and home once every decade, in my opinion. Like that's a team that I would do. We're gonna have a home and home once every decade. Like so, 2 games every 10 years. We're gonna play each other twice. I would certainly do that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Just it helps reach different parts of the map from a recruiting standpoint. And I think some people here play a game in Texas or down south. It's like, oh, so you want them to go down and play Texas at Texas or A&M at Kyle Field every single year? Well, no. Yeah, it could be, like you brought up, it could be in Arizona and Arizona State. It could be Oklahoma State. It could be, Oklahoma and Norman. It could be a TCU. It could be a Texas Tech. So a lot of different options there. But I think it definitely would help with recruiting for sure. I really do. So I think that would be a good strategy to have. So it'll be fun to talk about in the offseason.
Yes, it will be. We need to I'm going to task you with this, Trevor. I need you to have a little notepad. I'm going to send you one of the IB notepads. We have an IB notepad. Yes, we in the bookstore. I mean, an IB notepad that you have to have with you every time we do a show. And whenever we say we need to talk about that in the offseason, you need to have a running tally of all the topics that we're going to talk about in the offseason. And the ideal Notre Dame schedule needs to be on that first thing on that list. So that's one of your new duties. He's like, man, another thing on my list.
No, you got. I already keep a notebook with me and have
Nice.
running things that we talk about during the show, just in case.
Love it.
Just in case it ever circles back. So
love it.
We'll make sure we're prepared.
It's a list of things that Brian said. Like, hold on a second, Brian. On November 1st, you said that yes.
Just a list of receipts. Just don't delete his run game breakdowns. Don't
at 12:30 at night. Thanks a lot, Trevor. He's like, I accidentally trashed your thing. Is there a way to bring it back?
But don't worry. I put my own run game breakdown up just in case.
Marexi had it ready just in case yours went away by my hands.
Yeah, but don't worry. I got your back, bro.
Yeah, I love it.
Joe Alt Delete. Which group is easier to get up to speed with an offense? Freshmen, running backs, or wide receivers? What would you say is the hardest obstacle teaching-wise for both?
Running backs is easier. The hardest obstacle for them is pass protection, by far. Receivers is second on offense, and the hardest aspect of them is just it's not so much route running, especially now in this era of guys that play in just like 7-on-7 all the time. They have somewhat of an idea of route running, although there's a lot of things you have to deprogram out of them from the 7-on-7 mindset's different than you can get hit mindset, and there's actually a real pass rush mindset. But there's some semblance of I've got to win, leverage, things like that. It's more so all the adjustments and the structure, because one of the things that can happen with a lot of young receivers I'm seeing nowadays is they have to be taught, dude, you can't just go win that way because of the route combination we have coming. You can't. So I'm running a hitch. This guy jumped me. I got to go win. So I'm going to convert it to a go. We got a corner route coming right behind you. Can't do that. You got to know when to just take being covered or work this way to get open. So just some of the nuances of receiver play. I mean, I think kids are smart. Kids are a lot smarter in the pass game now than they used to be, because it used to be 30 years ago, kids are coming to college and they're learning how to run routes because they were playing quarterback in high school, or they were playing in a run game offense where they caught 15 passes as a senior and they ran 2 routes, go route and post route. That's like all, you know what I mean? Like now all these kids are throwing the ball in high school. They're playing 7-on-7. You're doing, they're a lot more, receivers are a lot more advanced when it comes to, I mean, high school offenses are running complex systems that like we never would have dreamed of high school kids running 30, 40 years ago. You know what I mean? And so they're just more advanced mentally and technically than they have been in the past. So receivers getting up there to being pretty easy to fit guys into if you're willing to put in the work, but running back is still by far the easiest position group in all things being equal for a freshman to come in and play. So,
yeah. Yep, I agree. Not much more to add there, man. Aiden Benami, will X win the Bronco again? Probably our only All-American this year.
Oh, boy. I mean, because of injuries, that might be true. Yeah, and unfortunately, as good as Jeremiah Love is playing, he's not putting up the kind of numbers that you would need to be an All-American running back. So that would make it a little challenging for that. But
yeah,
I mean,
if Howard Cross remains on the schedule, he's already tied his season high for sacks in a year already. So I mean, I could see maybe one of the 2 defensive tackles making it in there as like a second team or something. Maybe
he's at 5.5 tackles for loss and 4 sacks. I mean, if he gets averages 1.5 tackle for loss in the next 4 games and also gets a 1 game where he goes above that, he's at 10, 10, 11, with the reputation he had. Sure. It's possible. They're going to have a couple freshman All-Americans though. Several, in my opinion, but will he win the Bronco again this year? He'll be in the conversation. I mean, I don't know if he's getting talked about enough. I mean, I rarely hear people talk about Xavier Watts this year. But I mean, he should be in the conversation. He's a better football player this year than he was last year, in my opinion. That doesn't mean that he's going to get recognized as such, but I would imagine he'll be in the conversation. I haven't seen like a semifinalist list or anything like that come out for that. So I couldn't tell you for sure, but yeah, he'll be in the conversation.
Hulk strongest. I hear many pundits say we would be underdogs to the current top 10 and some by double digits.
That may be true because it's a Vegas thing, and I don't know, and they would definitely be true by those pundits because they don't know football, a lot of them, or they don't watch everybody play. They just go off reputation. But Notre Dame was also an underdog when they went and played Texas A&M. Would they be an underdog if they played Texas A&M again? Yeah, they would, because it's stupid. But like I saw somebody say, like some Twitter account, some random college football Twitter account, who would be favored to win between Texas A&M and Notre Dame? And Texas A&M had way more votes. And I'm like, you guys really just don't watch football. Like, and they lost to Northern Illinois. I'm like, all right, cool. They lost to Northern Illinois a week after beating Texas A&M. But sure, let's just go with that. But I'm like, even if you count the loss to Texas A&M, to Northern Illinois, Notre Dame has still been a far more dominant team than Texas A&M has been since they played. So, if you look at Notre Dame, for example, if you take away the Texas A&M game, in the 7 games since they played Texas A&M, Notre Dame is averaging 38.6 points per game. Right? Okay. So, and that's including the Northern Illinois game. If you look at Texas A&M, in the 7 games they've played, they're averaging 35 points per game. So Notre Dame's been better on offense by over 3 points per game. And people say, well, yeah, but they've played a tougher schedule. No, they really haven't, especially not good defenses. They haven't played anybody that's got a good defense since they played Notre Dame. They have scored over 40 points twice since that game, one against McNeese State. And Notre Dame's done that 3 times. And then defensively, Notre Dame, since that game, has given up a grand total of 12 points per game. And since that first game against Notre Dame, A&M, whose defense has been very good, by the way, has given up a total of 17.7 points per game. So they barely beat Arkansas. There's a lot of people that only started paying attention to Texas A&M when they beat Missouri, and didn't watch them the 2 previous games and didn't really pay attention to what they did against Mississippi State. And then the next time they watched Texas A&M was against LSU. And they had an overinflated view of LSU. LSU was not the 8th best team in college football. They had a good resume, but they were not the 8th best team in college football. Shocker, Brian Kelly lost a primetime night game on the road. Woohoo! Who knew that was going to happen? You know what I mean? Our entire staff knew that. We all picked A&M to win. And they did, because that's what Brian Kelly does. So, yeah, they'd be underdogs to a lot of those teams. But Notre Dame will probably be an underdog if they play Tennessee on a neutral field. I would love to see that matchup. Love to see that matchup for Notre Dame. Doesn't mean that it would make sense, but that might actually be true. But like I said, Notre Dame was an underdog against Texas A&M, and they won by 10. So, and that game was a lot closer to Notre Dame running away with it than it was A&M winning, in my opinion. So, yeah, I don't get too much. That's just talking. That's just talking points. It's nonsense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you. Muhammad Abdi, Brian, why does Notre Dame keep recruiting project dual threat quarterbacks instead of pocket passers like C.J. Stroud or Joe Burrow that fit Denbrock's system?
I don't think that they're doing. I don't agree with that premise, Muhammad. To be honest with you, obviously they recruited C.J. Carr. You could say, okay, well that was before Mike Denbrock was hired. Okay, fair. Since Mike Denbrock was hired, the only 2 quarterbacks they've landed are Noah Grubbs, who's a pure pocket quarterback, and then Blake Hebert, who's an athletic guy, but he's a pocket passer who also happens to be athletic and can run. But I don't think you're recruiting Blake Hebert to be a running quarterback. You're not recruiting Blake Hebert to run the offense the same way you ran it when Mike Denbrock had Malik Zaire, right? You're not asking him to do that. He's not going to be Jaden Daniels. You're not going to run the offense you've run with Riley Leonard. He can scramble, he can run, but honestly, what Blake Hebert at quarterback would look like as a runner would be a lot more kind of like what we saw from Riley Leonard this past game. A quarterback sneak and a quarterback draw, and then a bunch of scrambles. It'd be more like that than it would as far as the play calling. Not that he would be as effective as a runner as Riley. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the play calling would look more like that than what it did early in the year when they were running Riley with 7, 8, 9 designed play calls a game. So I actually, honestly, Muhammad, I think they are doing that. I think they are recruiting more of the pocket passer types, and the comp that I had for CJ Carr was in fact Joe Burrow. And I think Joe's probably got a little bit of a stronger arm than CJ had, but like similar body type, good athlete that's mobile, that can run when you need him to, but he's a pocket passer, accurate, smart. Like, I'm not saying he's going to be the future number 1 overall pick and he's going to throw for 6,000 yards and 60 touchdowns. But as far as a style of play, a skill set standpoint, Joe Burrow was my comp for CJ Carr. Kenny Minchie's also a pocket passer. Now, again, not recruited by Mike Denbrock, so it's kind, but honestly, and also Deuce Knight committed to Notre Dame before Mike Denbrock was hired. So he committed to Notre Dame when Jared Parker was the offensive coordinator. So they didn't recruit Deuce Knight obviously when you're Mike Denbrock, you got a top 10 quarterback and a top 100 player quarterback. You're not going to drop him because he doesn't fit your style when all the other quarterbacks you like are already committed, and there's not a ton of those drop back type guys in this class. But since Denbrock's been hired, they went after guys like Brady Hart, guys like Noah Grubbs, pocket passer type of guys. When they lost on Deuce, all the quarterbacks' names that I was told, that I heard, were all athletic passing quarterbacks. I think that's what Denbrock wants. He wants an athletic passer. And I think CJ's that. I think Blake Hebert's that. Noah Grubbs is not. He's just a pure pocket quarterback. So I would actually argue, Muhammad, that they have done what you think they should do since Mike Denbrock was actually hired. Because I get why you might think Deuce Knight, but because he's been committed so long, but Mike was committed so long, but Mike Denbrock did not recruit Deuce Knight. I don't think LSU even offered Deuce Knight when Mike Denbrock was there. I don't believe. I'd have to go back and look, but I know that they didn't push for him. I think he might have visited once, but I don't think that he was a guy that LSU had kind of targeted early as a guy that they wanted early in the process. So yeah, that's where, he's not listed as, he's not listed as having an offer on Rivals from LSU. So that's my take on that.
Ballpeen Shillelagh, let's say we win the national championship this year. Looking back, what 3 players would we say made the most impact in getting us there?
Riley Leonard, Xavier Watts, Mitchell Evans. I think you could maybe replace Xavier Watts for one of the 2D tackles. That's what I would say. But that would be mine. Xavier Watts, because I think that's that game-changing safety play, that big pick at the in the fourth quarter of a game that changes things, and then Mitchell Evans just becoming that monster at tight end that they would need, because then that would make the receiving core. Because I'm trying to think of guys who make everyone around them better, and I think those guys would do that. When I think Xavier Watts, I think of not just his production, but also that leadership with that young secondary around him would be a big part of why I went with him as well. Those would be the 3 that pop in my head. What say you, Trev?
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. I'm going to go a little bit of a different route in this, just in the spirit of providing a different answer here. But I'm going to go the route of, yes, I agree with Xavier Watts. Yes, I agree with the 2D tackles. But what I would ask of them to get us to a national championship is like they just play what they've been doing now. I'm going to look at this of who needs to elevate their play to get us there.
Fair.
Mine's going to be Riley Leonard. I like that because I do believe that there is another step that he will have to take to get Notre Dame to a national championship. I'm going to say one of the corners, because at some point, the Ben Morrison injury, there's going to be an impact there, or Notre Dame is going to face a team that will test them severely through the air. It could be one of the teams in the last 4 games. USC is a strong contender for that, but at some point in the playoffs throughout this last 4 games, the young secondary will be tested. And then I'm going to say one of the offensive linemen. Anthony Knapp on the left side, protecting the blind side, is going to have to take another big step for Notre Dame to win a national championship. So those are mine, which from the basis of I absolutely 100% agree with what you're saying. But Xavier Watts and the 2 defensive tackles can remain where they're at. And if they keep up that level of play, that would be like yeah, of course. I mean, that makes sense why Notre Dame is playing for a national championship, but I don't think that can come without one of the young corners taking that next step and somebody along the offensive line taking that next step, like an Anthony Knapp saying, hey, to win a natty, Anthony Knapp is going to have to play better than just he's okay, right? So those would be mine. BK's last brain cell. Projecting the roster in 2025, which defensive tackle prospects have the most upside, and what would your designated roles and snaps for the non-starters?
Most upside in 2025 would probably be Gabriel Rubio or Armo Mukum. Probably have the most upside in 2025. I would say. I mean, I think I love Donovan Heinisch. I do. I think he's going to be a very important part of the D-line next year. I'd rather have him coming off the bench as kind of a disruptive guy like he's been this year and go into the portal and get a really dynamic 3 technique that can, even as a Braden Fisk type of guy like Florida State got 2 years ago, somebody like that can step in and be that starter and allow Armel and Donovan and maybe Devin Houston or a Sean Sevillano or a Brendan Vernon, who I still think should be playing big end. I still think that they are making a huge mistake trying to turn Brendan Vernon into a 3 technique. His body just can't handle that weight. But put him at big end and let him, handle that position. And then those guys can all kind of split snaps the rest of the year. That's what Gabriel Rubio with some 300-pound, really disruptive 3 technique. And then have that depth behind it is what I would like to see at T-tackle next year.
Agreed. Kyle Wade, Boise State being good like the early 2000s is good for college football. I ask this since we always hear when Texas is good or Florida State is good, it's good for college football.
I agree. I think they're that group of 5 team that can get people to pay attention to them. And there aren't a lot of those left anymore, Kyle, because a lot of those teams have gone to the Power 5 level or Power 4 level. I mean, Houston's out of that league level now. SMU's out of that level now. They're back into the Power Conference. SMU used to be that. They were when they were in the Southwest Conference, but obviously they went the wayside when they got the death penalty. But looking at it, Memphis is still there, but Memphis doesn't have the tradition that Boise does. I absolutely think if there's that group of 5 team that you got to worry about, it is. And look, and every group of 5 league needs to be praying that Boise State gets into the playoff and gives whoever they play a 4-quarter game, because there will be a push by some to get rid of the group of 5 automatic bid when they expand to 14. And honestly, I understand it. I'm not actually opposed to it. If we're truly trying to get a national champion, like let's get the best 12 teams in the playoff. That should only be a group of 5 team if they actually are one of the 12 best teams. Like I would have it this way. My automatic bids would be the top 4, give the top 5 conference winners an automatic bid as long as they're ranked in the top 15. They have to be ranked in the top 15 to qualify for top for that bid. Or you could even say, but they have to be ranked. They get a bye, but they have to be ranked in the they get a bye or a home game, guaranteed home game, as long as they're ranked in the top 15. And the reason I say 15 is because I'm talking about when they expand to the 14-team playoff, because then you're just right outside of the top 14. But if you're outside the top 15, then you don't get an automatic bid. That if we're truly trying to find the best team and get a true champion, then I don't think teams that aren't in that level should get that. And so Boise State showing that they can compete in the playoff would give that level a lot more of respect when it comes to an opportunity to play. And here's the other thing that we might see too, Trevor, is we might start to see some of these group of 5 teams start winning some bowl games against some higher ranked teams, because there's a lot, like there may be like 4 SEC teams taken out of the bowls. And so now the rest of the bowls are like 5 on down. And then all of a sudden Memphis gets matched up against like the 8th best SEC team. And they're like, hey, we got an SEC win. A team like just trying to think of some other options. Navy gets into a bowl game and they play a 6th best Big Ten team and go out there and handle business and get a big win. Just trying to think through like the different leagues. those are things that could help them have at least enough of a reputation where you understand and you get enough advocates to say, hey, we still belong, deserve a spot in the playoff. That would be my take. So I think it is good for college football, but it's even better for the group of 5. But I do, because I think football's great when there's stories. There's great storylines. And when Boise State would go on the road and beat Georgia, which they did, not on the road, a neutral site game, and beat Georgia, which they did, beat Oregon, beat Washington, beat Virginia Tech. Those are great storylines. And just like, wow, this little team with a bunch of 0 4-star recruits and just, very few of these guys are going to be going to play in the NFL. And just like, because there weren't many guys from those great Boise State teams that did go to the NFL. There were some, but there weren't many. Ian Johnson, had a little cup of coffee in the NFL. And then he, because he wasn't an NFL player. You know what I mean? He just wasn't an NFL player, but it was a great storyline. We'll all remember him proposing to his girlfriend after that one game over Oklahoma. It's a great story. I mean, if and we'll always remember that game. So I think things like that are good for football. And I am someone who believes that certain traditional programs being good are good. Because Notre Dame being good is great for college football. Because the people that love everything that Notre Dame stands for are going to be excited about it. And the people that hate Notre Dame are going to be super engaged every weekend to hear you hate on Notre Dame or hear your take on Notre Dame or hear you love on Notre Dame so they can hate on you. And it's good for the game when there's that energy, that there's excitement, and it's not the same teams every year. But I have a list of about 10 to 12 teams, and I'm like, at least half of them have to be good every year for it to really make the sport the best it can be. I believe that to be true. And Notre Dame is one of those schools. And you could make a case for Boise being in that conversation as well. But I would say they'd be outside of my top group. But I do think it's good when a team like that is good.
Yeah, they're outside.
They've got the history.
Yeah, I mean, they're outside of my top group, but it's always good for any good group of 5 team to be relevant in college football. It was, how cool it was that some of the talking point this year that Navy and Army were both undefeated for the first time since World War II. That's cool. That's special. That's something that not a lot of people have gotten to say. That's something that people might have not gotten to say in the span of their lifetime, right? So stories like that are always really cool. I will say, Brian, as far as the playoff is concerned, I agree with you. I think it depends on what they do in the postseason, because you don't want it to be a case where, an Army or a Navy makes it in as a 12 seed and then plays a 5 seed. And then the result is what Notre Dame did to them at MetLife Stadium. Right. Because then it's then the argument is valid if somebody's like, why are we wasting a spot on a group of 5 team? Because if the spirit is putting the best 12 teams in contention to win a national championship, if an Army or if a Navy,
Liberty last year would have been the Navy example or the Army example you used this year.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. But any team that makes the top 12 or any team that makes the top 4 in previous years, that's the committee saying these are 4 teams that we believe that could win a national championship. But that's where the group of 5 bid kind of has to be careful. If Boise State gets in, it's they have Ashton Jonty. Maybe if he gets hot during the playoffs,
they took Oregon down to the wire. Right.
And it's this is a team that we believe,
and they have a history of beating teams like this. And that's the point that I think that to hit on what Kyle's saying is they have a history of beating the Oregons when they were good. They have a history of beating Washington when they were good, and Georgia and Virginia Tech and teams like that. So that's the thing that factors into it. Whereas Liberty doesn't have that.
Right.
Navy doesn't really have that. Army doesn't really have that. Memphis doesn't really have that. You know what I mean? And that's what Boise, because all the other teams that have that history are now Power 4 teams. TCU would have been that team had they not got sucked up by the Big 12. Utah was that team before they went to the Pac-12. And so now it's okay, well, they're the last remaining of those of when the Mountain West used to be legit. You know what I mean? When it was TCU and Utah and BYU, and then I think Boise joined for a minute after those teams left, and they were still good for a few years, and then it kind of fell apart. BYU left, and it kind of went down the tubes. But yeah, to your point, I think BYU getting there and being competitive is something that is going to help them if they're able to, when they go start negotiating for the expanded playoff and whether or not the group of 5 should still be in it. Because right now I have a hard time embracing that fact. Because here's the thing: if there wasn't a a automatic bid for the Group of 5 this year, there's an outside chance Boise would still make it.
Yeah.
If they go 12-1 and their only loss is a 3-point loss to Oregon, there's a shot that they get in as the 12th seed, as the 12th highest ranked team. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Good stuff, Trev.
Joe Alt Delete. What is your confidence level of Notre Dame landing commitments from the confirmed 2025 recruits visiting next week that are uncommitted / they are trying to flip?
Well, Madden Faramo is going to be on campus next weekend. I still feel very good about where they are with him. They're going to have potentially 2 receivers on campus next weekend. It's a little early for me to say that, but I do like where they're trending, at least with one of those guys. I would love to be able to sit here and tell you that I really feel like Notre Dame is going to flip Jalen Wiggins, but that's one of those ones with Florida kids. You just never know how they're going to like Notre Dame until they get here. Like I remember there was a linebacker. You guys remember Etienne Sabino? And it was like Notre Dame, Ohio State, Florida were like the 3 teams for him. And he visited Notre Dame, and Notre Dame was the perceived leader, and he hated it, just hated it. And it was too small of a campus. I think he ended up going to Ohio State. He just wanted that big school feel. You never really know that until you get the kid on campus. But they're working hard. I mean, they've at least got a shot there. Those are the big ones right now that I would say I feel comfortable making an opinion on. Andrew Olesh, it's still a little too early for me. I need to kind of get to hear more about that one, see how that visit goes, or even if he's definitely going to make it that weekend. I think, we'll kind of see. But and then again, I know they're trying to get a running back on campus that weekend, and we'll see how that one goes as well. So, yeah. There's a running back that I really like, and I'm not sure how hard they're pushing on him, but if they do push for him, I really like. But obviously we can't talk about it just yet. But yeah.
Irish Gordy and Knott. Out of all of the publicly known 2025 wide receiver targets, who has the highest floor?
Probably the kid committed to Oklahoma, but that Parnham kid that they offered from Florida, I like a lot as well. He's committed to Tulane right now. He's actually a pretty good player. Like I'd like to see him get a little bit more of a burst, a little bit more of just see him come off the line a little bit better. But I think it's Parham is his name from Coconuts Creek, but. I actually liked his film. He's a long strider, reminded me a lot of Mo Stovall. Not quite as fast as what Mo was in high school, but very similar body type. Plays defense, plays corner at like 6'4", 205. Plays some corner. Is a good football player. Really good football player. I like him. He's that sleeper type of kid that and he's kind of like the opposite of Leonard Moore. Because I remember last year when I was doing Leonard Moore, because the way that they played him, you never got to see Leonard Moore really turn it loose as a corner, like speed-wise, because he played off coverage and he kind of play like he'd pedal but you'd see his speed when he was playing offense or returning kicks. You'd see him get into the open space like, whoa, there's that speed. This kid's the opposite. You actually see him turn it loose a little bit more on defense than you do on some of his highlights on offense. And so, I'd say he'd be in that conversation. None of the guys they're talking to right now are really high floor guys, to be honest with you. That's why I say probably the kid from that's committed to Oklahoma that they're trying to get on campus as well. So, and Derek Meadows has a very low floor. So, I mean, he definitely wouldn't be in the conversation. So, probably the kid from Texas would be who I'd probably go with as far as highest floor right now. Because he's big, he's got some speed, he's got some strength to him. So,
Bobby S. Are you concerned with Hebert's lack of production and low completion percentage since he stepped up a class in competition this season?
No.
Irish Gordy and Knott. Well, he
did that twice.
All right. Bobby S. Are we still recruiting the running back position for 2025? Think it's necessary with Thurman being a solid but step down from our running back recruiting the last 3 years. If we don't, 2026 running backs need to be a stud.
I'm just like looking at a lot of these questions. So there's a really interesting way of like framing everything to sound negative. We're going to see in a lot of these questions, but my man, it's okay to be positive with things, man. Yes, they are still recruiting running backs in 25. There's at least 2 guys that I know of that they're talking to. They're trying to get one of them. They're both very good players. They're not recruiting them because they think they have a need. They're recruiting them because they think they're really good players. Simple as that. And look, Justin Thurman was recruited because, again, they're trying to build a roster. And if you bring in studs every year, you're going to lose them. You're not going to keep them. And then you run into roster issues. Justin Thurman's a guy that knows he's raw. Justin Thurman's a kid that knows he needs time to develop. He loves everything about Notre Dame. He's a kid that probably sticks around a little bit longer than some of the other higher-ranked kids who are not going to beat out Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams their first couple of years. And so they're out. Justin Thurman's also a kid that is a low floor, very high ceiling guy because he's a super explosive athlete that runs in the 4.4. Trevor, I saw him at Irish Invasion, not this summer, but last summer, going to his junior year. And they had I think it was 11 feet is where they had the broad jump ended, and he jumped past it. So they had to like take a tape measure and measure him past it. So he's a really explosive athlete. He's just still learning to be a football player. But they knew that, and that was part of their plan. And they always planned on, look, and if they go get another guy, guess what? They're still going to try to recruit a stud in 2026. That was always the plan, and it still is the plan, whether they go for a second guy in 25 or not. But yes, they are still recruiting running backs in 2025.
Ball Peen Shillelagh, what do you think the team could do to make every opponent afraid to play them? Seems many of these teams are excited to play against Notre Dame, but have no fear.
Just keep blowing people out and stop losing. Because, like, the reason these teams have no fear is because they know that Notre Dame is just due for a clunker. For a long time, Notre Dame would not blow teams out the way they were supposed to, partly because their talent wasn't such, partly because the mindset they had coming in, partly because their head coach would call off the dogs at halftime of some of those games. And so you saw a lot of these teams come to Notre Dame Stadium. You saw Tulsa beat them in 2010. You saw Northwestern come to Notre Dame Stadium and beat them. You've seen all these teams over these years, these mediocre teams come to Notre Dame Stadium and beat them. Marshall. Why would you be afraid to play Notre Dame right now? Why? And so what they need to do is they need to continue just blowing these teams out and dominating these teams. And then they also need to earn a couple more of those big game wins. Because the other thing, too, is, well, Notre Dame's not as good as Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State. Well, what makes you say that? Because they've played all those teams and they haven't beat any of them in a long time. Okay, fair. So once they get to that level, because like I've said this for a long time, Ohio State especially under Urban, their games would be over before the games kicked off because those other teams would just be intimidated to play Ohio State because they were physical and they would just try to destroy you. Bama was that way for a long time, including against SEC teams. You're just afraid. USC was that way. And I remember the game, I think it was it 2006? I'm trying to remember the game, but there was a game that USC played in either 06 or 07. And let me find here real quick. Yeah, it was 2006. They were still a really good team that year. They finished the year ranked number 4, but they lost that year to Oregon State. And I believe Oregon State hit like a last-second field goal. And that was a decent Oregon State team, but they lost 4 games. They were a good Mike Riley team, but they weren't great. And USC that year had a lot of close wins. They barely beat Washington State, barely beat Washington, barely beat Arizona State. I mean, this is a team that had just annihilated that league for a long time. And you could just see it when they played UCLA when like there was blood in the water. And the same thing the next year. I mean, they went out the next year, and they were still 11-2 and a really good team. They lost to Stanford at home, who was 3-9, who Notre Dame beat in 07. They barely beat Washington. They barely beat Arizona. They lost to Oregon. They barely beat Cal. And you just could kind of see that they weren't afraid of USC anymore. And again, it was several years before USC fell off because Pete Carroll was still there and they were still a really good football team. But you could see it when they played, Trevor, that teams just didn't fear USC the way they used to. Like then they lost to USC or Oregon State again in 2008. And they ended up going 12-1, but like they barely beat Arizona. They barely beat Cal. They weren't that same, this is going to be over by halftime team. And then in 2009, Pete's last year is when the bottom fell out and they were starting to get smacked because the Pac-12 had gotten better and teams just weren't afraid of them anymore. And so Notre Dame is in that phase now where people aren't afraid of them because they've seen enough teams come to Notre Dame Stadium and beat them. So how you fix that is you beat Ohio State at home last year. People are like, wow, they beat Ohio State. And then you continue to annihilate teams. And then when the Northern Illinois comes to town, don't take them lightly and take it for granted and change how you practice and do all the kind of things that led to that loss. Just go out there and annihilate that team. And the next couple times, then go out and beat Miami of Ohio 56-3. And then all of a sudden these MAC teams are like, well, at least we're getting a mill, at least we're getting a mill out of this game and we can pay off part of our athletic budget. It's worth the, 3 hours of a beatdown to get this, couple $1 million or whatever we're going to get for playing this game because we know we have no shot to win this game. It just takes time of just dominating those teams. And I think Notre Dame getting back to being an even more physically punishing team would be helpful. But the reality is Notre Dame, even in that world, is always going to be a team that people get up for. This is true in the Lou Holtz era because when Notre Dame is good, that is your moment to make a name for yourself. It just is. I mean, more Notre Dame fans know who Glenn Foley and Pete Mitchell are than Boston College fans. You know what I mean? Because David Gordon. Why? Why is David Gordon's name still discussed? Because he had that game-winning field goal that kept Notre Dame from winning a national championship. Why could anybody tell you who Glenn Foley played for in the NFL? I could, but not a lot of people can. Played for the Jets. He wasn't very good. But you know what? People remember him beating Notre Dame in 1993. That's always been true. That's always going to kind of be there because Notre Dame is a legendary program. You can become a legend if you have that type of performance against Notre Dame. That's just, earlier, a Michigan fan, I think, said it earlier in the game. He's like, why did Desmond Howard win the Heisman in 1991? It's because of what he did against Notre Dame. There's a lot of that to that. So that's going to be part of it as well. Is you're always going to get a little bit of that, hey, this is my chance to kind of make a name for myself. But if you start dominating these teams the way you're supposed to, and it started last year actually, but Northern Illinois kind of allowed teams to kind of creep back in there and like, okay, they're not afraid of Notre Dame anymore. But just keep doing what you're doing right now. And, Stanford's going to know, hey, we got no shot against Notre Dame. Navy's going to know, like, hey, listen, we got no shot against Notre Dame. They beat us by 30 every year. Doesn't matter how good we are, they're going to annihilate us. And then eventually the goal it changes. And then it's no longer, hey, we can beat Notre Dame. It's like, hey, let's just be competitive against Notre Dame. And once a team has that mindset, they're done. They're done. And that's really what it comes down to. And keep recruiting elite players. That's the other thing. When they watch film, they're like, holy crap, that guy's really freaking good. So like in 2 years, if you're starting defensive ends or Boubacar Traore and Josh and Bryce Young, and you're bringing Christopher Burgess and Logan Thomas and guys like that off the bench, they're going to be like, holy crap, we're toast. That's just a fact. Like, I can't play with that guy. You know what I mean? Like, hold on a second. Their smallest guy on the offensive line is Billy Schrouth. Are you freaking kidding me? You know what I mean? Like, that's how you get to that point, is to have those just dominant punishing teams. And they're getting there, but they're just not there yet.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is a small facet of it too. And mind you, when I mean small, emphasis on the small part here. But some of it is like a distribution of talent because of the transfer portal and NIL. It's small. Notre Dame is well in control of what teams' mindset is when they come to South Bend and play them. But one thing that I have kind of seen throughout this college football season as a whole is that some of the perennial teams that you would be quote unquote like afraid to go play, some teams just haven't been that. Like in years, I can't tell you how many times, like when Vanderbilt plays Alabama, they just look like they do not want to be there, right? But Vandy picked up some key transfers in the transfer portal. And when I mean that, I mean like you're getting guys on your team in some crucial spots that like they've played in these kinds of games before. So it's not new, right? Whereas in years past, it was, you play it, you play at Marshall and you play at Northern Illinois and you kind of just play a bunch of MAC schools. You're not going and playing in front of 80 to 90,000 people. You're not playing in a televised game. The stadium's not that loud. Now, sometimes you are getting guys on your roster that have seen that and they're coming from schools where that was every week. I still think 95% of the reason is in Notre Dame's hands, right? But I don't think I think it is also fair to say that some of these slightly lower tiered teams are just getting some gamers on their roster a little bit too. Like, I think that's also fair to say. Like, I just went and pulled up Ontario Brown's stats. His best game of the season so far is still against Notre Dame.
Yeah.
It is.
He's been banged up. He got banged up in that game against Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember, he got knocked out of that game, and he hasn't been the same since then. But that's part of what Notre Dame used to do to people, though, Trevor. Is you were going to limp out of that game.
Yeah.
But no, he is not the same back he was last year.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's just we say it as a fan base ad nauseum that people get up for this game. Notre Dame is everybody's Super Bowl, and that still holds true. Now, what Notre Dame can do is just say, yeah, we're your Super Bowl. You're not going to win it. Like, it's not going to be close. So, yeah, I agree. But I think the transfer portal and NIL do have a little bit of a factor in that as well. Bobby S., who from our 2025 class has the best ability to play the nickel position? We're losing Clark and Hurd. Do we have another real option on roster currently?
Yeah, Carson Hobbs has played a lot of nickel this year. I think Leonard Moore could play it as well. And then Dallas Golden was recruited with the possibility of coming in and playing nickel early on as well. So, yeah, Dallas is a guy that I would not be shocked. I believe he's going to be an early enrollee, but I would not be shocked at all if Dallas Golden is playing nickel in spring practice with a shot to say, hey, this might be our guy at that position. I still think they're going to go out and get a portal guy, but I think that portal guy is going to have to compete a little bit harder for that job this season. And I don't know that he'll dominate the reps the way that Jordan Clark did. I think it might be a lot more like it was in 23 when Thomas Harper rotated with Clarence Lewis in the nickel. Meaning, like, he was the starter, but like they would spell him like they like to spell everybody. Where this year with Jordan Clark, you haven't been able to spell him at all at nickel.
Bobby S., chances Morrison returns next year. What about Thomas and Colsey?
I don't see any scenario in which Deion Colsey comes back next season. Jaden Thomas, I'd bring him back. I mean, if he's going to still buy into the role he has now and be the team player he's been this year, which he's been a phenomenal team player for Notre Dame this year. Yeah, I absolutely love that kid, Jaden. I mean, I do. I love Jaden Thomas. And I put him in the same category as like the Pat Coogans and the Rocco Spindlers in that he doesn't have the same role he had last year. And he still doesn't, but he goes out there and gives you everything he's got every time he's on the field. I love that kid. If he wants to still have that role next year, I'd absolutely let him have that role next year. Chance with Benjamin Morrison, I think it's a little bit too soon. I think part of it's going to depend on how his rehab goes, what he hears back from NFL scouts, what's the NFL draft board at corner start to look like. I think there's a chance. I don't know him well enough to say that I would be willing to make a guess on what the chances are right now. I just know that there's a chance. I don't believe Benjamin Morrison has decided from what the conversations I've had that he's definitely going pro next year. I don't know that he definitely decided that before the injury. I think he was leaning towards that, but I don't know if it was guaranteed that it was going to happen. What y'all have to understand is NIL has changed things a lot for some of these guys. Let me stay at Notre Dame for one more year, make a couple $1 million, get my Notre Dame degree, and still be a high draft pick. That changes the equation compared to where it used to be. Plus, they're going to look at Cam Hart and be like, well, Cam stayed 5 years. He could have gone pro after 2022. He decided to come back for another year. He got even better. Yeah, he wasn't drafted super high, but guess what? Cam Hart right now is a rookie starting in the NFL at cornerback for the Chargers. Starting. And since he got started in the lineup, I think he's like their second or third leading tackler. Not just because he's getting beat and he's making tackles. I've watched Cam play. I told his mom, I said, your son's the only reason. I've watched an NFL games, regular season games for the first time in like several years because of I want to watch Cam. And he's playing very well from the couple games I've seen. So there's I don't think it's been decided yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Mohammed Abdi, Brian, did the defense exceed your expectations since it is younger until the last year, or younger unit than last year? Sorry.
Actually, yeah, it has. It has been better than I thought. I mean, we talked before the season, Trevor, that statistically it may not look like it did last year. It'll still be very good, but they're probably going to give up a few more big plays, and it's literally been like right on par with where it was last year. I mean, it is really wild how, I mean, they're better from a points per game standpoint by 3, right? So last year they were at 15.9 points per game. This year they're at 12.1. Their yards per game is slightly up, 276.3. This year they're at 282.9. Last year they're at 4.44 yards per play. This year they're at 4.48 yards per play. That number's hopefully likely going down after the Florida State game. You know, their pass defense has given up a few more yards than last year by I'm sorry. It's actually less than last year. But 0.2 more yards per play. The passer rating is slightly lower than it was last year at this time. They've given up more touchdowns per game, but they're also very disruptive with interceptions. And you look at rushing yards are a little up this year, but that's because they've playing the option. They were at 119 last year, 3.54 per carry. This year they're at 126.8, but they're 3.57 per carry. I mean, their numbers across the board are almost identical in every category. They're still a top red zone team. They're really good on third down. They're more disruptive this year when it comes to pass breakups and interceptions than they were last year. I mean, it's amazing how this team has basically just repeated last year, but slightly better statistics in most categories, despite losing J.D. Bertrand and Maris Leafau, who are very good players in draft in the NFL. Cam Hart, Thomas Harper, DJ Brown. I mean, it's just like Javonte Jean-Baptiste, who I believe is playing for the Redskins or what are they called? The Commanders.
The Commanders.
Right, Commanders. Believe he's playing for them. I saw somebody tweet a highlight of him getting a sack in the regular season.
He got his first sack a couple weeks ago.
So it's like, dude, he's playing. And then you had some injuries, Benjamin Morse, and you're just like, dude, and they just keep rolling. It's a testament to the coaching they're getting, but it's a testament to how well they've recruited that position, because almost all the guys that have stepped in for departed players outside of Jordan Clark, they're all recruited by Marcus Freeman guys. They're not portal guys. I mean, what portal guy on defense has made really an impact this season as a starter or even a key rotation guy? Rod Hurd's had a couple good games, but he hasn't done a whole lot.
Clark.
Jordan, that's it. That's what I was saying. Like, Jordan Clark's it. RJ Open's been a disappointment. So, I mean, it's all being done by guys you recruited from high school and brought in from high school. So, yeah, I mean, here's the thing I'll say, Mohammed, and Trevor, you tell me if you agree. They've been every bit as flashy as I thought they would be. The difference is they're way more consistent than I thought they would be. I thought this defense would be a little bit of here and then a dip and then here and then, you know what I mean? They haven't really had that game this year where they just had that one or two games so far, right? They haven't had that game where just like, okay, they look like a bunch of young guys. I actually thought Navy was going to be it, could be it. And it was like, nope, we're good. It's amazing. Great coaching, great talent, focused by the players, great leadership since that Northern Illinois game, something we questioned about the defense early in the season. You've seen the leaders emerge. It's impressive to see. So yeah, it's exceeded my expectations, which is saying a lot because I still thought they were going to be a top 10 defense, and not right now they're a top 3 defense. It's impressive, dude.
Yeah, really. First and foremost, it's a testament to coaching. But Brian, you and I before the season, we all were talking about, how athletic this team was and how long and how fast this team was. And you combine that with really good coaching, and they did get better in multiple different facets with injuries, which is just scary, man. I mean, it is just scary. I mean, we're talking about a team, like, could you imagine, and I hate playing the what if game, but could you imagine if, Riley Mills and Howard Cross are doing what they're doing and they still have Jordan Botelho and Boubacar Traore rushing the quarterback off the edge and Gabe Rubio comes
Just one
back
of them. Just one of them. If they just had one of them, like
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be fun to watch.
Isaiah Lehman, would you take any running back in the country over Jeremiah Love?
I mean, look, he's Notre Dame's running back, and I'm happy that he's Notre Dame's running back. But if you're talking about, like, you want to win a national championship this year, I mean, how do I not say I'd love to have Ashton Jonty on the team for this season? The problem is, and the reason I would say I'm happy with where Notre Dame is because I'd have to sacrifice 2 years of Jeremiah Love for 1 year of Ashton. But if it's about this season, I mean, he's a special elite back who might break Barry Sanders' all-time record, which, by the way, we need to put some asterisks by that because he'll do it in 12 to 13 games where Barry Sanders did in 11. And what a lot of people don't realize is Barry Sanders' statistics in 1988 do not count the bowl game where he rushed for over 200 yards because back then they didn't count bowl games in statistics. So and he did that in a Big 8. I'm just saying. But it doesn't take away from how special that kid has been. But I never love these type of questions, Isaiah, to be honest with you, because it's like the kid picked. I want the kids that want to be at Notre Dame. But if we're being honest, as good as Jeremiah Love has been this season, he's not the best running back in college football. He may be next year, but he's not right now. And the best running back in college football is the kid from Boise State, and it's not even close. Could you imagine Notre Dame running read zone stuff with him at running back and Riley Leonard and stuff? I mean, come on. That'd be phenomenal. But I'm very happy with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price being Notre Dame's 1-2 punch at running back. I'll say this. If you could say, hey, could you trade one for one? I'd say, yeah, sure, I'd do that. If you'd say, okay, well, in order to get him, you have to give up Price and Love, would you do that? I'd say no. Yeah, I'd say no.
Isaiah Lehman, again, what teams do you think Notre Dame could not beat on a neutral field right now?
All right. Okay, here's my list of teams that I don't think Notre Dame could potentially beat on a neutral field right now. All right. So the Buffalo Bills, the Miami Dolphins, the New England Patriots, the New York Jets, the Baltimore Ravens, the Cincinnati Bengals, the Cleveland Browns. You get my point? Right? There's not a college football team in the country that Notre Dame can't beat. I'm not saying they will beat everybody. I'm not saying that, but there's like in 2021, Notre Dame had zero chance of beating Georgia that year. They had zero chance of beating Alabama that year. In 2019, Notre Dame was a good football team, 10-2, a lot of NFL. They had zero chance of beating LSU. Zero. None. There are other years where you could go back and say that team had 2016. Notre Dame had zero chance of beating a lot of teams in college football that year. The 2020 team had a very slim chance of beating Ohio State or Clemson with Trevor Lawrence or Alabama that year. Very slim chance. This team, if they play their game, and it's not even like they need a bunch of things to go their way. If this team just plays their game, they can beat anyone in college football. I'm not saying they will. I'm not saying that they're going to go to the playoff and win 4 in a row and win a championship. I'm not saying that. Alabama could have beat Clemson in 2018 and in 2015, but they didn't. Or 2016, but they didn't. Clemson could have beat Alabama in 2015, but they didn't. There's a difference between did you beat a team and can you beat a team? Notre Dame can beat anybody in college football this year on a neutral field. I'm not saying they will. I'm just saying they can. And so, and that's partly, it's partly twofold, Trev, right? Notre Dame's a lot better, and there's no dominant elite teams this year. There is no, the reason, if LSU 19 was playing college football right now, I'd say they can't beat that team. With Benjamin Morrison out and Boubacar out and you're not winning a shootout. You're losing that game. You're losing that game. I don't know if this Notre Dame team could beat 2021 Georgia. I don't know that they could. I don't think that they could. But there isn't that team this year, Trevor. So it's twofold. This team is better, and there is no elite team in college football this year. That's why I say that there's no one that they can't beat on a neutral field.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And just to clarify for anybody that might be listening that has questions around, this is not a homer take either, right? You could say this for a handful of teams. It's not just Notre Dame. Just with there being no dominant team in college football this year, Notre Dame being one of them, they are one of the dominant teams, but there is no like peak team that's like, yeah, you're just not touching them, right? You could say the same for a lot of teams. Like I would hear out an argument for it. I don't know if there's a team in the country that could beat Oregon or a team in the country that, you know what I mean? On a neutral field right now, like there's a lot of different answers that you could fit in. But what pertains to this question, is there a team that I think Notre Dame could not beat, especially on a neutral field? No. With the way that this team is put together, I think Notre Dame is competitive with any team that they play, whether that ends in a win or a loss.
Ash Archer 452 literally nailed it, because you're talking about it not being a homer take. This comment is spot on. I think there's probably 10-ish teams that could beat anyone on a given night.
100%.
I don't know that I'd say it's 10, but he's in the ballpark. It might be 8. It might be 12. And that's the whole point is I think Notre Dame can beat anybody this year. I think Texas can beat anybody this year. I think Georgia on any given Saturday or any given neutral field game could beat anybody this year. And I don't think this is a vintage Georgia team. I think Bama, despite their flaws, could on any given day beat anyone this year. Ohio State could do that. Oregon could do that. I don't believe that about Penn State. I wouldn't put them in that conversation. I think Texas A&M could because they have that great D-line. You know, so there are certainly teams, and I know I'm forgetting a couple teams probably. Like, so I don't know if it's 10 because, like, I don't think everyone in the top 10, like Tennessee, I don't view that as that type of team. I don't view Penn State as that type of team. I don't view Indiana as that type of team. I'd say it's probably closer to like 7 or 8. But like, there's at least 7 or 8 teams this year that, to my opinion, could just on any given Saturday beat anybody. If Notre Dame plays their B+ game and Ohio State plays their A game, Ohio State probably wins. If Notre Dame plays their B+ game and Georgia plays their A- game, maybe Georgia might win that football game, right? But if Notre Dame plays their B+ game and Ohio State plays their B game, or Notre Dame plays an A- game and Ohio State plays a B+ game on a neutral field, Notre Dame is going to win, right? And then you flip that, you know, that's kind of, and a lot of times you're playing your B game and I'm playing my A- game because of us. Our A- is making you a B in that game, right? I mean, that's kind of how it works. You hardly ever see 2 teams play A football. A buddy of mine tried to say, well, Penn State USC in 2016. I'm like, that's a phenomenal game, but neither defense played a B game, much less an A game. 2 offenses played their A games, but both teams didn't play their A game because Penn State's defense got ripped by USC that night. And then USC's defense, you kind of expected to get a little bit ripped. But that's what I'm saying, Trev. Like, it's not just Notre Dame that answer is true for. It's for at least 7 or 8 teams that answer is true for. Right? I would say it's true for Georgia. It's true for Bama. It's true for Texas. It's true for Alabama. It's true for Ohio State. It's true for Oregon. It's true for Notre Dame. It's true for Miami to a degree. I mean, I don't know that I necessarily, to a degree, I could maybe say you could throw them into that conversation. I mean, you could maybe throw Clemson into that. Maybe a couple 8. But like definitely the 7, 8 teams that I just mentioned, I have no doubts confidently saying it. Those teams on any given Saturday can beat anybody. So it's not just a Notre Dame take. Where in 2019, there was really nobody that had a shot to beat. The only team that had a shot to beat LSU in 2019, the 2 teams that had a shot both played LSU and both lost. Bama and Clemson. Those are the only 2 teams that had any kind of shot to beat them in 19, and they both lost. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm at.
I agree.
So good question. Good question. That was Isaiah that I think asked that question, right? That's a very good question.
That was a good question. Bobby S. Can we close with Faremo and Owusu Boateng, Wiggins, a quality wide receiver and running back? If we did, how would this rate compared to the 22 through 24 classes? If they just landed one of the linebackers, Wiggins, and a quality running back and receiver, this class to me is right on par with the last 2 classes. It's an outstanding elite class. You'd have one of the best O-line classes in college football. You'd have one of the best linebacker calls in college football, one of the best secondary hauls in college football. You'd have a good receiving corps, not a great one, but a good one. Richardson's a top 250 kid. Elijah Burris is a top 250 kid. If you get one more quality receiver, you'd upgrade at running back from where you've been most of the cycle. You have one of the best tight ends in all of in the country in James Flanagan. Your defensive line class is solid. Chris Burgess is a top 100 caliber guy.
You know, the other guys are solid guys. Dom Hulak, senior film, has been good so far. He's a top 250 guy for me now based on my evaluation of his senior film. And you've got a top 100 to 150 caliber quarterback, in my opinion, in Blake Hebert. So I mean, because again, it's they've got elite talent, and you've got two elite secondary players, right? You've got an elite linebacker in Madden Faramo, another, and by elite, I'm kind of referring to anything in the top 100. Anthony Sackett's borderline in that category. Christopher Burgess is in that category for me. You've got at least one offensive lineman that's in that category for me right now. James Flanagan is that. I mean, James Flanagan, I don't know. I think some Notre Dame fans just assume he's an okay player because he's a legacy. Guys, and I've seen people say, why not go after this guy? I'm like, guys, have you seen James Flanagan play? This kid could be a 3-year starter at Notre Dame at tight end or defensive end. He's that good. He's a stud. But I don't know if we talk about him enough because he committed so early and because his dad's a legacy. I think there's this assumption he kind of gets lumped in with maybe a little bit with some, you know, like maybe Jerome Bettis Jr. a little bit, which I think is a little bit unfair. And if they get one of the two running backs that I think that they're after, I'm pretty happy with that. Like, very happy with that. This would be a heck of a class. It'd be Notre Dame's best 3-year stretch since the late 80s, early 90s period for under Lou Holtz. It would be that good. It'd be that good. And then the D-line class, if they got Jalen Wiggins, would be a top 7 to 8 D-line class. You'd have Wiggins and Christopher Burgess to go with Dom Hulak and Joseph Reif, who'd be a nice, you know, number 4 depth piece. That'd be one heck of a D class. Gordy Solstead, you know, his knee injuries kind of hindered his growth a little, his projection a little bit, but he's still a 6'6", 260-pound kid whose dad played in the NFL. You know what I mean? So that'd be one heck of a class, Bobby. Be one heck of a class.
Justin Hancock, Brian, who would you say is the most overrated team in the top 12 and why?
Right now, I would say probably Iowa State. I'm going off the AP poll. So the top 12 includes the tied 11 between Iowa State and Clemson. I'd say Iowa State. I mean, I think Tennessee's overrated. I mean, I think they shouldn't be as high as 7. I think Miami's a tad overrated at 5. I think Penn State's a tad overrated at 3, but they both belong in the top 12. You know, Tennessee maybe belongs in the top 12. I mean, they're still living off of that Alabama win, which was obviously a big win, but they haven't played like a top 10 caliber team to me. But, you know, they've got a resume of a top 12 team. Iowa State, to me, is a borderline top 20 team. Borderline top 20 team. I mean, they have a 21-3 win over North Dakota, who's an FCS team. Let me see what North Dakota's record is right now at the FCS level. I know they've lost it. They lost to North Dakota State 41-17, and they just lost to Youngstown State this past weekend. They have 3 losses. North Dakota State beat Iowa State more convincingly than beat North Dakota more convincingly than Iowa State did. You know, their biggest win is over a 1-point come from behind win over Iowa. They beat Houston on the road 20-0. Nice pull. They pulled away from Baylor late, 43-21, but it was a competitive game. Nice win on the road against West Virginia. Barely beat a bad UCF team. Needed a last-second comeback win to do that. They're a very mediocre team. They are a borderline top 20 team right now, in my opinion. From a resume, not even like what we argued with Pitt earlier, just from a resume standpoint. How are they ranked behind Pitt? You know what I mean? Like, how are they ahead of Boise State? I mean, how are they ranked ahead of Pitt? How are they ranked ahead of BYU, who has 2 same league, 2 top 25 wins? Like, it makes no sense to me. But they're the most overrated team, and I think they're going to get exposed as that here coming down the stretch, Trevor.
Yeah, I think so too. My Iowa State was going to be mine. I think just because of their strength of schedule and who they've played, I'd hear out arguments for Clemson. And then if you want to have the discussion around like overrated in the top 12, but like should still be in the top 12, I would listen to arguments about Texas. I don't think Texas is the 6th best team in the country right now because it's one of those questions where their most impressive victory is either Vandy at Vandy or Michigan in the Big House. So, you know,
the one thing I would somewhat disagree with there is outside of the Vandy game where they controlled that game Vandy scored late to make it closer than it was, but they've dominated the teams they're supposed to play at least.
Sure.
And that's the one thing I'll give them. So I'd probably push back because the only reason I'd push back a little bit on that, Trevor, is you could make that same case for a lot of teams. You say like Tennessee has a better win than Texas does, but they have not looked nearly as good in their wins as Texas has, right? But that goes back to the point discussed earlier. So there's nobody right now that you look at and you're like, that team is just, whew, that's a no-brainer top 5 team right there, boy. I'll tell you what, man, that's just the way they're playing. Resume-wise, there's teams that belong in the top 5, but there's nobody that you're like, oh, boy, I don't want to play that team on a neutral field or on the road. Man, they scare me. Like your point, like Texas, there's 3 weeks ago, everybody's telling us how great Texas was. They might not lose a game. They got a chance to win the championship. I'm like, all right, now we're it's like with Texas, I feel like to a degree, we've kind of gone from one extreme to another. They were getting a little overhyped as this great best team in the country. And you're like, yeah, let's see if they play somebody. And then now they're getting a little bit dismissed because of the bad loss. And somewhat understandably so, because like you said, their resume is soft. And as far as teams they beat, but I just say like sometimes it's like, yes, that's true, but they have really been impressive in the games they have won. Like they could have beat Michigan way worse than they did. They called off the dogs in that game, like big time called off the dogs. But it just kind of goes back to what we said, man. There's just no really dominant teams.
I see 05. Which upsets do you want to happen?
Well, I want Louisville to beat Clemson. I definitely want that one to happen. I hate to say this, but I would actually like Penn State to beat Ohio State. That technically would be considered an upset. I would love it if Duke beat Miami. I would love it if Arkansas beat Ole Miss. I would love it if Michigan beat Oregon. I can't believe those words came out of my mouth. I would love to watch Florida beat Georgia. Michigan State beating Indiana would be very good for Notre Dame. Would love that one. And then I'd love to see Kentucky beat Tennessee. Those are all upsets that I would love to see. And why I see 05? Because I think those are all things that would benefit Notre Dame. And it's like, so how can you root for Michigan? I'm not rooting for Michigan. I'm just saying that Michigan beating Oregon would be really good for Notre Dame. So because again, Notre Dame's going to get in my opinion, if they win out. It's about positioning. The more these teams beat each other up, then all of a sudden they're all with 2 losses and Notre Dame sitting there 11-1, riding a 10-game winning streak, and they haven't played a competitive game since the first weekend of September, and they're a 5 seed. And then they get the 12 seed in round 1, and then they get the Big 12 champ in round 2, and I'm losing all my money because we're flying to all those games. You know what I mean? So it's like that's where my do I want to happen? It all comes from that. I'm gonna have an article coming out tonight for tomorrow that's going to say it's like kind of like a rooting guide. I promised that earlier in the week, and I'll have that later tonight. Like, here's who Notre Dame fans should be rooting for in these games and why. Any of those you disagree with, Trevor?
No, the one that I want the most to happen is Louisville over Clemson.
Yes.
I like Louisville. I like Jeff Brom. I think they have a really talented offense, and I think Clemson's one of the most overrated teams in the top 15 right now. So
Agreed.
I would really like to see Louisville over Clemson.
I have Clemson as a legitimate top 12 team right now, simply because even though I haven't played anybody, they're killing everyone. Mm-hmm. Because like there's no great resumes out there. That's why I get so annoyed. People, Notre Dame hasn't played anybody. Who has outside of like Georgia? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's frustrating.
The Sun Chance kid, Bryant, does Freeman go after another starting transfer quarterback next year?
I don't believe so. I think there's a chance they go after a portal quarterback, but from everything I've been told, the only way they do that is if like they lose somebody and they need to repair the depth chart. But they might actually consider, let's say that one of the 2 older quarterbacks leaves. And so you'd have, let's just say for whatever reason, Steve Angeli gets his degree and Rutgers calls him up like, hey man, you're the missing piece for us, which he actually would be. Could you imagine Steve, like their quarterback's awful. Could you imagine Steve Angeli on that team with that running back and that, they'd be a much better team right now. Or Syracuse, hey, we need someone to replace Kyle McCord, throw the ball 50 times a game. Sign me up. You know what I mean? Like, let's say he leaves for that reason. You've got Kenny, CJ, and then a true freshman in Blake Hebert. You'd have Anthony Rizak as a walk-on kid. I think they would consider moving Tyler Buckner back to quarterback. Now he's like, hey, you're not battling for the starting job, but we're going to redevelop you as a quarterback. So that way, if we ever get into a situation, we can go in there, run our read zone, run our power read, do our stuff with you, and do enough to get us out of a ball game. I think there's a chance they would do that before they'd go to the portal for a depth quarterback. But if they lose 2 guys, then they kind of have to go to the portal for a quarterback, for a depth quarterback, not a starter, because they'd lose 2 guys because CJ beat him out. That would be, or Kenny, somebody wins and then 2 guys leave. I don't think that's going to happen, but it could. Then you may have to go to the portal in the spring for a depth guy quarterback, because then you have CJ Carr, a true freshman, Tyler Buckner, and Anthony Rizak. You'd need another veteran quarterback. Go get some Ivy League guy that can get you out of a ball game, or some MAC guy that wants to get his master's from Notre Dame and maybe get into coaching, and protect you a little bit. But there's not a lot of good options there. You know what I mean? For guys that are going to be okay coming and not starting.
Beezer 12, Washing Beard. Who is under the most pressure this weekend, Ryan Day or James Franklin?
Ryan Day.
Yeah.
Do you agree, Trevor?
I think it's Ryan Day by
James Franklin to lose.
It's
like if he wins, it's like, what? James Franklin won a big game? Get out of here. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, it'd be a shocker almost. Where Ryan Day, I think there's a lot more pressure on him. I feel, Trevor, tell me if I'm wrong. I feel like people have just accepted James Franklin for who he is. He's going to have Penn State winning 10 games or more almost every year. He's going to lose most of the big games he plays, but they're going to recruit well. They're going to be competitive, and they just are who they are. I just feel like there's sort of all right. Ohio State would never accept that from their coach. Never. Michigan wouldn't accept that from their coach, I don't think. Well, they might, but Ohio State certainly won't. And whereas with Ryan Day, it's like, dude, if you're not winning championships, what are you doing here? I mean, I know we've only won like 2 since the, 1970s, but hey, that's our expectation, is to win it every year. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's right. I think there's way more pressure. Like, if James Franklin loses, like, that's just James being James, right? Somebody just said it. It's like Johnny from the Boot. Great comment. BK equals PSU James Franklin. Where Notre Dame fans were just kind of, for a lot of Notre Dame, like now, no one will claim this now. Like, very few will claim this now. But like when he was actually here, a lot of Notre Dame fans, we just can't win that. It's too tough academically, to this, to that. You just accepted your lot in life. Hey, we're 10 and 11 win team every year. It's all good. Right? That's James Franklin at Penn State. That's a great analogy, Johnny from the Boot. Great analogy. I think Ryan Day, by a mile, has more pressure on him in this game.
Yeah, I mean, I would make the argument. I would go as far as to say that this is a make or break game for Ryan Day, and here's why. The last 3 years, you have not beaten Michigan. You have not competed for the Big Ten. You have not done well in the playoffs. So now the next step is, if Ryan Day loses, they are now losing to Penn State as well. You know what I'm saying? Like a team that you perennially beat. Butchered that. But you guys know
I have some words like that too, man.
Yeah.
Where I just can't say that word. Perennially.
Yeah.
Perennially.
A team that you always beat. It's a team that you always beat. Right?
They're a perennial victim of your program. How about that?
Thank you. I can say perennial, not the other one. We're just not even a team that in the perennial lens you beat all the time, right? And for a while that was Michigan, right? And then it was no longer Michigan. And you're always playing for the Big Ten championship. And now you're not playing for the Big Ten championship. And now what else happens? A new fresh team comes into the Big Ten in Oregon. And you're like, oh, we're Ohio State. We run the Big Ten. Then you lose to Oregon. So now you go into the stretch of your season saying, okay, we have a ranked Penn State team that we play on the road that will completely turn around Ohio State's season. If they go and they beat Penn State, national media, Ohio State fans would be like, okay, we're still Ohio State. Like, we are still that team. We are still in contention for the Big Ten. You lose to Penn State, there's now questions on your ability to beat IU. There's a good chance that you're not competing for the Big Ten championship again. And you go from being a favored national championship winner with who you bring in to you're going to be a 10 seed. You're going to, you know what I'm saying? So like It's just, this is very much, yeah. There's very much a make or break game for Ryan Day on Saturday. I firmly believe that.
If Ohio State loses this game, the odds of them playing for the Big Ten title are slim. That would mean that Ryan Day will go through for a 4th season where his team did not play for the Big Ten title. They have not played for and won, because they haven't lost a Big Ten title game. They haven't played in one since 2020. He made the Big Ten title game his first 2 years. He hasn't been back since, because Michigan's beaten him every year.
Yeah.
But if he loses to Penn State, this will be the 4th year in a row he will not only not win the Big Ten, but not even play for the Big Ten title.
Yeah.
That puts him scalding hot. Scalding hot.
100%. Like I said, this is a make or break game for Ryan Day. Make or break.
Agree.
John A1. If the offensive line is settled in execution of pass pro versus opponent schemes, do you believe Denbrock will continue to scheme to protect certain players on the line?
At times. It depends on the matchup. I mean, there's going to be times when, like, hey, look, we're not going to have Anthony Knapp on the edge against, like, let's say they play Georgia, right? Hey, we're going to probably do our best in this matchup, even though we think our offensive line's playing a pretty good job. We may want to think about not putting Anthony Knapp in a situation where he has to defend Michael Williams or Jalen Walker off the edge, in a one-on-one. Let's maybe slide to him, chip to that side. You know what I mean? There may be some games like, hey, we need to protect Pat Coogan going against Shamar Turner in a rematch where we didn't maybe feel we needed to with Ashton Craig, something like that. It'd be more matchup related than you have to protect Rocco every week, or you have to protect Pat every week. You have to protect Anthony Knapp every week. It'd be more about, in this matchup, we're going to need to give him some help, is more of what it would be, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Domer Grizz. Sorry if I missed it this week. Still finishing upon further review from the Navy game.
Wow,
but
you're way behind.
But what are the top 2 priorities for Freeman and company this second bye week?
Domer, I'm going to bring this up because I'm not going to answer that right this second. We have a watch yesterday's show, whole show yesterday, and I'm going to have some articles about this next couple of days as well. So we'll get into that. But, obviously O-line continue to get better. Pass game continue to evolve, a little bit better finishing on defense in the run game. It's really about taking that next step. It's just a lot of that. Just keep evolving, keep building on what you're doing from the last couple of games is really the to sum it up is that. But just really, you'll get to yesterday's show and you'll get a much better explanation than what I can do here in a Q&A type format.
ND Milton fan, is Jeremiah Love the best running back Notre Dame has had in the last 20 years?
No, he's not even the best running back they've had in the last 2. Like, look, guys, I love what Jeremiah Love is doing, but you realize that in order to match what Audric Estime did last season, Jeremiah Love in the last 4 games would need to rush for, let's see here, almost 800 yards. So let's go. Audric had 1341. Right? So he would have to rush for he'd have to rush for 777 yards in the last 4 games to match what Audric did last year. It's 194 yards a game. He would have to score, let's see, 9 touchdowns in the last 4 games to tie what Audric did last year. Yeah, but Audric got used a lot more. Audric averaged 6.34 yards per carry last year. Audric averaged 6.39 yards per carry last year. Jeremiah Love this year is at 6.34. Right? So let's enjoy what Jeremiah is doing and not do this. Where we talk about, is he the best running? He's not even the best running back the last 2 years. Now, could he end up being better than Audric when it's all said and done? Yeah. Is he better as a sophomore than what Audric was as a sophomore? I believe so, yes. But guys, let's not just completely forget that last year in the regular season, Audric Estime ran for over 1,300 yards and 18 touchdowns last season. So, I love what Jeremiah is doing, and I think Jeremiah is going to be a star, and he's probably a better NFL prospect. But guys, Audric Estime was special. And, Jeremiah's got 16 catches for 1 touchdown. Audric had 17 for 142. Jeremiah's going to finish with better receiving numbers, but as of right now on the trade pace, it won't be significantly better. So is he maybe the most talented? Sure. But best? He's not even the best running back they've had in the last 2 years. And that's not at all a shot at Jeremiah Love. It's more of let's not forget how good Audric was last year. I mean, he was special last season. So, no, my answer to your question is no, he's not. He could eventually be, because I wouldn't have said it was Audric 2 years ago as a sophomore. So Audric's pretty good, but he's got to hang on the ball a little bit better and finish games a little bit better. He got a little tired. Remember, Audric is in 2022, carried the ball 5 times, but he'd have to tap out. He'd get real tired. And he became more of a workhorse last year. Audric was special last year, folks. He was special. And he didn't have a guy like Riley Leonard protecting him as a runner either. He was special last year.
Brian Harrington, how good is Army compared to Navy?
Similar. Army's a little bit more physical on defense. Navy's faster on defense. Army's a better, a more devoted running team than Navy. They're a more dangerous passing team, just dropping back and throwing it than what Army is. But they're very similar teams. I'd probably say Navy's a little bit more of a tougher matchup for Notre Dame, but Army will be a battle too. If you don't bring it, if Notre Dame plays like they did against Army, like they did against Navy, it'll be a similar outcome.
Jay Carr, thoughts on Jadon Blair as the starting safety next year across from Schuler? I think it's a possibility with his skills and man coverage.
We kind of beat you to the punch a little bit on that there, Jay. Well, actually, he beat us to the punch. We talked about it before we could get to your question because this was in before the show started, or shortly after the show started. I think it's certainly a possibility because here's the thing. We had a story about this. Jadon is actually planning on doing what CJ Carr did last year, which is actually enrolling in December, which would allow him to practice with the team throughout the playoff if they're in the playoff, which would be huge. And think about the scout team look you're going to get for the offense during that stretch. Oh, there's a 6'4", really freaking fast safety in the middle of the field all of a sudden. Where'd that come from? I think it's a possibility. It's not going to be easy. I mean, there's some really good players there, and I won't be shocked if they go to the portal again, but he's going to play next year. It would not shock me if Jadon is starting at safety next year. It would not shock me at all. At all. Would you be surprised by that, Trev?
No, not at all. I'm just thinking about what the depth chart's going to look like, and Notre Dame's going to have 2 6'4" safeties.
Yeah, Luke Talich. Yeah, when Luke Talich is on the field, yeah, that would be a heck of a look.
Could you imagine that?
Hey, Navy, guess what we're going to do at safety?
I was just about to say, you have 6'2" Leonard Moore, 6 foot Christian Gray, 2 6'4" safeties. I mean, just imagine. I mean, I'm putting myself in even if I'm like a passing team, I'm just stepping back and I'm looking and there's 2 safeties. I mean, 2 to 3 inches shorter than Bryce Young. I mean, that's just, man.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, it'd be fun. Got a couple super chats here, Trevor, and then we're going to have to wind this down. We're not going to be able to get to everything, but there's a couple that I definitely wanted to get through here. And then obviously the super chats are we got a super sticker from my guy K Grant. Appreciate you, man. Good to see you. And then we have a super chat from Connor Grant.
Thank you for the super chat, Connor. Given what we know about Notre Dame this year, what is a realistic ceiling, and is a first-round playoff loss a disappointment in your view? Thank you.
It is. It would be. Now, again, there's always let's see what the matchup is. Let's see what the roster looks like. Did they lose a couple more players? I mean, there's always let's see. But I have a tough time envisioning Notre Dame losing a home game in the playoff being anything other than a disappointment. Yeah. To a lower seeded team, yeah, it's probably a disappointment. I think the realistic ceiling for this team is a semifinals, if not the title game. I think probably semifinals because, again, it's a young team that's beat up and has lost a lot of injuries. The fact is they'd have to play 7 more games just to get to the national championship game. That's a lot. A lot can happen between now and then. But that's as long as there's no more injuries, I think the legitimate ceiling is at least the semifinals, if not making it to the title game. I'm not saying that's gonna. I'm thinking that's possible. I think it's realistic, but more likely would be a semifinal berth would be that. And I think anything less than a first round win is going to be disappointing to me. And you could still be disappointing if you lose a second round game to an inferior team. But if you're the 7 seed and you get Georgia in round 2 and you lose a 4-quarter dogfight, I'm not going to be like, oh, what a freaking disappointment that was. I'm not. I'd be disappointed that you had a chance to lose, but it's more disappointment of like as a fan, like, oh man, they had a shot to win. I'm not gonna be like, this was a disappointing season. Like, there's 2 ways to use that term. I'd be disappointed they lost a heartbreaker because as a fan, but as an analyst, it's like that's a heck of a season, and you're definitely heading in the right direction.
Oh
if
yeah,
that would happen.
yeah, absolutely. It's there's 2 different types of disappointment. There's Notre Dame only beat Miami of Ohio 28-3, and they lose to Northern Illinois. That's disappointment, right? Like, but like if Notre Dame makes it to the national championship and loses, even if it's I don't want to say like a blowout, but like a 10-point loss or something like that, like maybe not a 4-quarter dogfight, I'll be disappointed saying Notre Dame lost the national championship. Because like all the entire week leading up to the game, we're going to be talking about a lot of shows and putting stuff out there about it. But I mean, looking at what the team had to overcome from where they were on September 7th, if you would have told me after the Northern Illinois game, Notre Dame was playing for the semifinals in the college football playoff, I would have told you that you were crazy and this team had a long way to go. And guess what that team did? Go that long way. So I'm with you. There's 2 different lenses to look at with disappointment. Tommy Guns. When college football finally breaks away from the NCAA, would you prefer a Roger Goodell type person as commissioner or a group of people at the top or a mix of both?
I think there needs to be primarily the group. I think one of the biggest issues we have in our country right now is that power rests too much in the hands of a small group of people. I think our system of government was created to be adversarial. So when people are like, oh, you guys just got to, you don't get. No, I think that's how it was created. Because when there's adversarial, then we don't see where this uniparty thing has kind of come along. And yeah, they fight on these little minor things, but the big issues that really take away our freedoms, they tend to be on the same page. They all want to take away our freedoms and give themselves more power, right? But in a true system that if we were like our country was meant to be, the executive branch was not meant to have the power that it does now. The legislature was not meant to be one where you wanted them working together as one to do all these things that benefit the elites and hurt all of us, like it has become. It's a lot of fake against each other, when in reality, it's a uniparty that primarily does enough bickering to make us think that they are, on one's on our side or not, depending on what, but they're both working against us flat out. Right. So it's the same thing in college football. I don't want it to be where just one person can come in and just make all these rules and there's really nothing that anybody can really do about it, or this person is here and he kind of manipulates the group. I want it to be a group of people from all sides, not just all ADs, but like I want it to be a committee that has a players rep that has a lot of authority and power, a school rep, people that are defending the schools, people defending the players, and say, hey, look, guys, this is how it's going to, we're going to work towards a common goal, but nobody's dominating this thing. We're going to try to do what's best for the game and do what's best for our bottom lines and also do what's best for these young men. That's what and I don't think you can do that because there may be a commissioner who has the what's best for everyone involved. It's like when you have some presidents or some leaders or some governors that just, I really care about doing what's right for the people. And that's fine. It works for his 8-year term. But then when he's gone, some other power hungry clown gets involved and he's just corrupt or incompetent or whatever the case may be. Right. I mean, look through our history. We've had some presidents that were great presidents, R's and D's. Right. And then there's been some from those same parts that were awful. Right. And if it's a group and you don't have that, then I think you have a better shot at making it to where everyone has representation. We actually have to really we have to give, you have to give, and we're all looking out for what's best for the game, not just what's best for our parties. I think that's the only way this is going to work, in my opinion. That's it. All right. Here's one I wanted to get to. I thought this was there's a lot of good ones left. We can't get to all of them, but there's a couple I definitely wanted to get to.
Chris Sabo. Would Alec Ayomenor be a potential portal target? I saw him a R4 draft grade, round 4 draft grade, which might make him return to college.
I am not really super excited about Notre Dame going to the portal for a wide receiver. I'm not super excited about that. I'd like to see them develop what they have. He, however, is someone who I think is good enough to where I'd say you kind of got to go get him. Like, if he's in the portal and because what I don't know that Notre Dame has is a true boundary receiver. And I think he would be a true boundary receiver. Like, he'd take over that Bo Collins role, and I think probably be even better, in my opinion. So, although I would like to see them just develop the kids they have, he'd be one that'd be a little too hard to pass up for me. And he came from an academic school. Stanford's not letting him slide academically. That's that, you know what I mean? Like, he's got to go to class. He understands all the things that make Notre Dame different, right? I think he'd be a really good fit into the offense. I think he'd be a very good fit into the what Notre Dame as an institution. I don't know the young man, so I can't say that he'd be a character fit. But again, if he can survive at Stanford, he probably would fit at Notre Dame in that regard, I would think. And so, yeah, he would be one that I would go look at. Absolutely. And he's been – what's hurt him is he's got just a horrible quarterback situation right now. But you have C.J. Carr throwing the ball to him next year or Kenny Minchie throwing the ball to him next year, he's going to put up a whole lot better numbers. A whole lot better numbers. So, yeah, I'd have him be my starter, and then Micah Gilbert's my number 2. He's getting maybe a third of the reps. This kid's getting 2/3 of the reps, and let's roll. That's what I would do. I'd feel super good about that. What say you, Trev?
Yeah, there's just some players in the portal that are too good to pass up, and he's one of them. With this, it's kind of one of those things. It's like the and, not the or, right? You go out and get a guy like Ayomenor, and you still play Micah Gilbert, and you still play Cam Williams, and right, like all the young guys that we want to see developed. But if a guy like that and a talent like that, who is familiar with Notre Dame, right? He played against Notre Dame at night in that stadium in 2022, and he played against them at home this past year, and he played against them in California to end the season last year. So it's a team that he's familiar with. Right? Kind of similar how like Riley Leonard was familiar with Notre Dame when he played them and was familiar with Sam Hartman and knew him. So that, like, there are some ties too. So I think he's a guy that I don't think that he's somebody that you can pass up. I really don't think that. And that can be the case for some positions. Yeah.
Yep. Real quick on this one from Chuck Melcher. Any word on a contract extension for Freeman? I don't believe that is something that Notre Dame's going to address until after the season. It's going to depend on how the season finishes. But if Notre Dame's a playoff team this year, then now Marcus Freeman deserves an extension. Prior to this season, he did not deserve one. During this season, he does not deserve one. If he leads Notre Dame to a playoff and gets him a playoff win, then sure, give him an extension. That's fine. Because he's now done it he's improved 3 years in a row. He didn't have that 1 year wonder like Mel Tucker had. He's done it for 3 years in a row. The recruiting is elite. He's shown that he can go out there and get top assistants, identify and get top assistants. He would deserve it. Now, if they fall apart down the stretch, then, so that's my thing is if I'm Notre Dame, I'm like, hey, Marcus, we love you. We think you're doing some great things, but let's wait till year 3 is over with, see how that goes. Then we can talk about an extension. And I would. If they're a playoff team, and especially if they win a playoff game, yes, he deserves an extension. Even if it ends disappointingly against a bad loss in the second round, you still got to the second quarterfinals of the national playoffs. You're clearly ascending as a program. It's enough for a contract extension. Now, that loss may have a say in, the extension is only going to go to here as opposed to here. And if I'm Marcus Freeman, I wouldn't have wanted an extension before this season. I would want to wait till after the season. If you think this team's got a chance to make a run, because if he goes out and let's say they get a 6th seed, they win their first round game, they get Clemson in round 2, beat them, and all of a sudden you're in the semifinals. I don't care what happens then. With all those injuries and as young as this team was, I took them to the semifinals. Show me the money, right? Show me the money. You're going to have them replicating that skit they did from Jerry McGarth, Audric Estime, and Sam Hartman. It's going to be Marcus Freeman with like Al Golden and Mike Denbrock behind him. Show me the money. You know what I mean? Like, it's what it's going to be. Show me the money, right? You know what I mean? And it's going to be Pete Vavok on the other end, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's what it's going to be if he takes him to the semifinals.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
he doesn't, then he'll get an extension, but it won't be quite like that.
Yeah.
And he should. If he takes his team to the semifinals with all that they've had to be through, they've gone through this year, he'll deserve a nice little pay raise. So last couple, because I have to go, everyone, just so y'all understand, my wife is going out of town today, and she's going to be leaving soon. And if I don't get off the show here right now, then I'm not going to get to see her before she leaves. But there's a couple that I wanted to get to real quick. Travis Mann, I'd love to address this in a future show. He says, do you think Notre Dame would join the SEC to give the Big Ten a big middle? You know what? If Notre Dame had to join a conference. I've addressed this before. I think the only reason Notre Dame would do that is if the Big Ten tried to do some shenanigans to force Notre Dame to a conference and Notre Dame had to join a conference. Like if Notre Dame was forced into a conference, say you can't play for a championship unless you're in a conference, right? And the Big Ten tried to bully Notre Dame into the Big Ten, I think Notre Dame would give them a big middle finger and go join the SEC if that was the only two options. But I think if they were forced in that situation and the Big Ten wasn't stupid, I think Notre Dame would probably rather go to the Big Ten. Closer to you academically, closer to you geographically, it would make more sense if you had to join a league and there was only those two options to go to the Big Ten. But if the Big Ten tried to bully Notre Dame or did some shenanigans that Notre Dame didn't like, I absolutely think they would tell them to go F off and they would go join the SEC. That's what I think would happen.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think Notre Dame necessarily wants to do either. So, and then here's I wanted to get to this last question that I thought was a great question, and we'll end with this one. I thought this was really good.
Patrick Earwood, what would the score be if Notre Dame played Florida State 4 different times with all 4 different quarterbacks?
I think Notre Dame would beat Florida State by at least 17 with all 4 of those quarterbacks. Yeah. I think Notre Dame could beat them with CJ Carr right now with CJ not able to throw. He just had to hand off and throw left-handed. I mean, they suck so bad. I'm being a little hyperbolic there, but come on, dude. They are so
I was about
awful.
to say, Anthony Rizak in there, Tyler Buckner in there. I mean, it's just, for everything that I've watched from that team is just, it's bad. It is bad down there in Tallahassee. I will say that. I think pick or choose what quarterback that you want to have in there. Ideally, it's not going to be the one that trots out on the field on November 9th. But I think any margin of victory is minimally, with any quarterback, 17. I'll say that. I don't know what the final score would be, but I think, yeah.
Yep. All right, Trev. That's going to do it, man, for our mailbag today. Great questions, everybody. There were so many good questions I couldn't get to. A couple of them I've asked that you guys put them on the board because they were such good questions. I'd love to be able to discuss it on the board. There's one from W.O. Lewis. I would love to do that, but that's like a half an hour answer. Be a great board question or a great email me question. And, yeah, lots of good stuff from everybody today. Thank you all for being with us. Trev, you want to take us out of here?
Yeah, you got it. Great submissions today, guys. Enjoy the weekend off. Enjoy some really good college football. But before you go, make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell for when we go live next week and talk for Notre Dame's matchup on Florida State, which we've already begun to preview, and we do not think that it will be a close battle. But make sure you go to boards at irishbreakdown.com to see all the premium content that we're going to be putting out. Have a fun and safe weekend. Thanks for tuning in today. Go Irish.